So, where do you rank Jedi in terms of let's just talk about the original trilogy. Where do you rank it?
In my heart, I think because it was for so long when I was a kid, I almost sometimes feel like I want to put it first, even though if like I kind of know better, like Empire is so much better in so many ways. But the thing is that Jedi is built like a dark ride at like Disney World, so it's kind of like immersive in that artificial way. It's kind of hard to fall out of love with that from like when you were a kid.
So that's another question I was going to follow up with, but since you brought it up, was this your favorite when you were a kid?
Well, I watched Jedi and Empire. I think the first time I saw them, I was like maybe one, and so for a while they were just kind of like one 5 hour monolith of a movie in my mind. And then I remember the way I started to differentiate them was that Empire was the laugh it up fuzzball movie because my dad would always repeat that line to my sister and I, and we just thought it was super funny. And then, when my brain was like slightly more developed, I remember like when I was like 10 to 12 years old, I was like watching some younger kids down the street. And I remember we were watching like that Rankin Bass Christmas special, like with Year Without Santa Claus, like the one with the Snow Miser, Heat Miser song, which is weird because it was like mid April. And then we put on Return of the Jedi after that. And I kind of had like a new awakening with that. It was like, this is brilliant. Like these dumb little kids before me don't understand the artistry. And then I went home and ate a Lunchable. But then, like, but then, so then, like, from that point on, for a while, that was like easily my favorite one. And then it kind of maybe gradually shifted at some point from there. But it's still like, I still kind of have to put it above like New Hope, even if I have to put on Power at the very top.
That's interesting. Russ, what about you? Where do you rank it now, and where did you rank it when you were a kid, or is it the same?
Top marks across the board. It was number one as a kid. Also, it was the first Star Wars that I saw, so I think I must have been somewhere between the ages of like 3 and 5. I remember I was sick from day camp at the time, and my dad had left me a VHS tape. I had never seen Star Wars. I only knew of it roughly from him talking about it. And yeah, so Return of the Jedi was the first one I saw. Number one back then, number one now, which uh, the modern cinephile would say Empire Strikes Back, but I know better. It's Return of the Jedi for sure. I could see through all the art. It's the purest of Star Wars experience. It's amplified in all the ways. It's like everything they took two movies to get it right, and Jedi is just is perfection for me.
Well, that's interesting. I want to follow up with both what you said and something that Fry said. But Mickey, where do you rank Jedi? Return of the Jedi.
Now I rank it third. Definitely not my favorite as a kid. I think Empire was my favorite as a kid. But I
Really?
think I yeah, even young, I would say then it was New Hope, and then no, as a kid, I'd say Jedi was second, and then New Hope was last. Rewatching now, like, yeah, I would say I think New Hope, is more cinema, you know, in a pure sense where like Fry said that, and rewatching this Return of Jedi now, it's like, to me, it's like almost like, it's separate from those 2 movies and the original Disney World Star Wars ride and world experience and Return of the Jedi are actually 2. It's more related to that. I get a sense that to me, there is artifice of watching this, like, just watching this around, there's, like, kinda this artifice of, like, I can see the moving pieces behind the scenes of this being more commerce than a movie start to kinda show that will to me, rear its head more in the next one. But as a kid, it was more fun than to me than in A New Hope. I don't know why I like it. That's kinda like, obviously, you already did Empire 1, I don't wanna get too much into it, but there was just something about, like, even young, even, like, it seems like it's a darker, more complex movie that still I thought was cooler. But then the space battles. I mean, honestly, the Endor commando scenes and the big space fleet battle to me as a kid were like, yes, this is my second favorite one because this stuff is awesome. Though I would also say it kind of like, talking about like vibes, it did have I felt like 1 and 2 had more like Friday night, let's order a pizza as a family, make some popcorn and make it a cinematic experience, where the third one was more of a like, okay, I'm awake at like, 11 a.m. on Saturday and it's bright daylight, but I'm gonna watch this one. It's kind of
That's
less of a
very
cinematic
Yeah,
interesting.
experience, but
that
more
is
of
a good
a
way to put it.
yeah.
That's very interesting.
It's
Yeah.
interesting because it works lighter too. It's a much lighter movie. I mean, it's Tatooine, Endor, other than I guess the throne room and the space battle, compared to like an icy cold world and the asteroid belts, type of thing. To me, it's a much brighter movie.
You mean
I've
you mean literally brighter?
Literally bright, yeah, yeah. Which
Yeah.
to me,
I
like,
can't.
Yeah.
again, I think if you're talking vibes, it kinda goes into that vibe of, like, this is more of, like, the Saturday, you know, I'm maybe even half paying attention, but as a kid, I'm paying attention to stuff I think is cool, and that's why I enjoy it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say second as a kid. It wasn't my favorite. Empire was my favorite, but I liked it better. But now watching it, third. But it's still good. I still like it.
Yeah. First of all, I do think it's interesting that even as a kid you thought that Empire was your favorite. But what I will say to that, there is this like mood and tone that's kind of mysterious about Empire that really draws you in and makes you lean in a little bit. So I think as a kid, I knew there was something going on that was intriguing to me in Empire. But yes, as a kid, Return of the Jedi was my favorite for all the reasons that you said, Mickey. The spectacle of the battle over Endor and on Endor. I mean, like the intercutting between those three sequences, like that whole space battle was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen and stood as like the most amazing, impressive space battle in film TV. Like it was still like the gold standard for a long, long time. I do think there's something to what you said, Fry. It is kind of an amusement park ride, and it's kind of constructed that way a little bit. In my mind, Return of the Jedi is it's like a string of set pieces.
Yeah.
And I think it is consciously designed to be that way. I think Lucas took a lot of lessons from Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was also consciously designed to be like a string of set pieces.
Yeah, no, I agree with like what you're saying, and like I think something that really highlights that to me is the kind of back and forth nature of the final battle, especially on Endor when they're taking things back and forth. And to me, I don't know, something like that like really screams like amusement park ride or one of those amusement park shows you go see at Disney or whatever, where it's like now we have the upper hand and now we have it, and it's just that it's a roller coaster almost.
Yeah, well, for me, the real thing is it's like the speeder bike chase is really emblematic of it. It's like, and now is the speeder bike chase. The movie sort of stops to have an action set piece that is like totally unnecessary, right?
Right.
I mean, it's cool and it's fun, but like from like a plot standpoint, from like a moving the story forward standpoint, it does nothing to develop the characters. It does nothing to move the story forward. Like it is like just there because we want to have an awesome speeder chase in this movie.
When you were talking about how there is something about Empire, even when you're a kid, that pulls you in, that's kind of like it's in the sense that it's kind of dark. I think a good example of that for Empire is the scenes on Dagobah, like when R2D2 is like kind of like caked in mud. Like I feel like that's like a kind of a piece of like set direction that like wouldn't happen in Jedi because it's a little more clean like that. Like it's more like we're on rails.
Yeah,
Like
no,
that's like kind
that's
of like a
true.
naturalistic thing. Like I feel like that's like a naturalistic holdover in Empire from like the original one.
That's
You wouldn't
interesting.
see.
This actually speaks to something Russ said and Mickey said. Russ, you said this was like the most Star Wars, Star Wars. Like it even out Star Wars is Star Wars, right? And Mickey, you said that you were kind of starting to feel the artifice a little bit and like see, get a sense of why certain things were happening from the behind the scenes thing. What I can't unsee from the vantage point we have now is that this is where the prequels start. Like Return of the Jedi is the prequel to The Phantom Menace. Everything that people deride about The Phantom Menace can be found right here in this movie. The Phantom Menace is Return of the Jedi, but more. So in the end sequence, you don't have 3 set pieces that you're cutting between, you have 4. And in The Phantom Menace, you don't have the Ewoks, you have the Gungans, right? And I said this in the last podcast about Empire, but basically for me, where Star Wars, I don't want to say goes wrong because I don't think it's wrong, but the gravity of making Darth Vader Luke Skywalker's father warps the rest of the movies around that, right? So when you have that twist at the end of Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi has to be about Luke and Vader. And then one of the things that I think Return of the Jedi is often criticized for is the convenience of tying up the other by making Luke and Leia brother and sister. And you can feel a lot of that sort of continuing on in the prequels. Like arguably the prequels, that's completely what they are, is those kind of conveniences of tying everything together and making these people related so it all interconnects and like explaining stuff that makes the whole world of the movie and the saga quote unquote feel a little bit smaller and convenient. I think the prequels start here is my point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if
Yeah.
you think about like all the things that they talk about, the behind the scenes stuff that was going on, there's a lot of debate, but like a lot of people say like in the end, this was mainly a Lucas directed movie. He really started picking up and directing a lot more because of the drama. It's rumors, like it's one of those things where I don't think it'll ever be proven, but that he did stepped in right off the bat more than he did in Empire, I think.
I actually heard it was the opposite. The thing that I was like listening to him like talk at this I forget what it was, but it's from like 2010. And he was talking about how he was on set a lot more, like he actually meant to not be allowed on set a lot in Empire, and it turns out he was there more than he expected to be. And then for Jedi, he ended up being like almost totally not there.
Well, having read the Jonathan Rinsler making of Return of the Jedi, making of Empire, he certainly was on the set of Empire more than he thought he would have to be. And I think he was on set. So I watched From Star Wars to Jedi last night, and obviously the documentary camera crew captures whatever they capture, but Lucas was giving a lot of direction, and Richard Marquand and George Lucas would be standing there. The actors would go over to George Lucas and ask him what he thought. So I very much get the sense that obviously we weren't there, we don't know. We only have these first and second hand accounts from other people, but this ties into a place where I wanted to start. The choice of director in Richard Marquand. Why Richard Marquand? In preparation for this, and I know at least a couple of you have, I watched the movie that Richard Marquand directed right before this that got him the job, 1981's Eye of the Needle, starring Donald Sutherland, which I thought was a really great fucking really awesome movie. Like
Yeah.
it's from a genre that's really up my alley. It felt kind of like a popcorn version of like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
A little bit of an erotic thriller.
Yeah, no, I watched the movie. It was really good. I enjoyed it very much, but I don't get the sense from watching it. Oh, okay, this is the guy who has to do the next Star Wars. Except that the moments between the characters, he clearly demonstrates in that movie he can direct actors, he can work with actors, and he can direct action. And I feel like what happened with Richard Marquand is sort of what happens now when, somebody like a Gareth Edwards or like a Ryan Coogler or like a Colin Trevorrow, like you have an indie hit, right? And then you immediately get scooped up by some studio to make a franchise movie, like you do a Marvel movie or a Star Wars movie, frankly.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Like Marvel
Yeah.
movies, yeah.
And it was like Lynch was also a possibility too, and it would have been the same thing.
Yes.
Because 83, what did Lynch even do? He would have been super indie at that
Right.
point.
That was before
No, well, he had done
Brilliant.
Eraserhead and he had done
Elephant Man.
yes, and he had won the Oscar for Elephant Man. I think he won an Oscar. I think that movie won an Oscar, didn't it? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, as a huge David Lynch fan, I would have loved to have seen the David Lynch Return of the Jedi, but I think we kind of know what that is. It's
Dune.
it's
Dune.
Dune. Yeah. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story of how David Lynch recounts the meeting that he had with George Lucas. He says that he met with him and they went out to some restaurant for lunch that only served salad, and he thought that was very weird. And George Lucas was describing the movie. David Lynch had this awful headache, and he couldn't really concentrate on what George Lucas was saying. He was like, and then he was talking about these like little teddy bears or whatever, and my head was just throbbing. And eventually I said, George, like this really seems like your baby. Like you have an idea for what this is. You should direct this. Like you don't need me to do this. And I think that was a very canny thing that he understood. He got the sense that, oh, he wants someone that he can tell what to do. And I think in Marquand, he had a director that was willing to
Pliable.
collaborate. Yeah.
Well, there was
To
a
be
whole
generous,
thing too having to do with the DGA was part of it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's certainly true.
But there's also other parts of Eye of the Needle that kind of, maybe just because I was watching it in the context of Star Wars and like how it might connect, but I mean, most of it takes place on an island called Storm Island, and like it's storming there, and there's like a cliffside, and I was like, this is kind of like a Star Wars planet, like just the setting of it. And also, like you said, yeah, I think more than even the other Star Wars movies, that there are kind of like actor moments in Return of the Jedi, and I was thinking that when I was watching that too, because there's one extended, well, probably a couple, but in Eye of the Needle, but there's like one extended sequence between old Donnie Sub and like the Kate Nelligan, probably like a 5 to 10 minute scene of just the two of them talking. And then and Jedi, we get two back-to-back scenes of Luke talking to Yoda and Luke talking to Obi-Wan, and it's just like the stretch of dialogue.
Yeah. So basically, what I think Lucas saw was he was like, okay, here's a guy. He can direct the actors. Great. And then I can do all the stuff that I want to do. I mean, essentially is the vibe that I get. And I do not want to denigrate Richard Marquand's work on this, because having now seen Eye of the Needle, which I think is a really solid, very entertaining, very well-made movie, he's obviously, or was, he passed away far too young, but he obviously was a very talented, capable director. And I was reading Secrets of the Force, which is a book that came out, I think, this year or last year. It's an unauthorized oral history of Star Wars by Mark A. Altman and Edward Gross. And they have a lot of archival interviews with Richard Marquand that I had never read or heard before, where he basically says, like, he knew what this was and he was down. He respected Star Wars. He was on board with George's vision of it, and he wanted to help him realize it in whatever way he could. Whereas, like, an Irvin Kershner and a Gary Kurtz, the producer who did not produce Return of the Jedi, but he did the first two, I think they had different visions of what this should be or what this could be, that I don't think George Lucas, I don't want to say he didn't want to take the time to listen, but I feel like by this point, for many, many reasons, he had very specific ideas of what this movie should be and how it should be done. And he wanted it done, I think, being the operative word. I think he was over Star Wars at this point, and I think he wanted to wrap up the trilogy so he could move on and pick up the pieces of his life.
Yeah. You almost get there's like a sense of maybe like Star Wars was a monkey's paw to like George Lucas, where he created one of the greatest things. And then by Return of the Jedi, it's just like this, it's an albatross.
It was, and I would argue that it really took him about a decade to kind of fall in love with his own creation and be game to spend another decade plus of his life involved with it. I think he came to peace with that, but I think, that kind of crazy success and crazy pressure and crazy whirlwind of, being the eye of the storm of a cultural phenomenon, the likes of which I don't know we'll see another quite like again. I don't know if it's possible to create something of this kind of seismic cultural
I don't think
force.
so.
Marvel's kind of doing something similar, but not quite.
Yeah, but that's adapted.
Yeah.
Like that's an adapted universe that already existed. So I look at Star Wars as being a wholly original written for screen. Well, wholly original in that it's it's a proxy for Dune, but wholly original in its own way. What he's trying to do. And Marvel Universe is like people I've heard from adults with children who have seen Star Wars, and the children just forget about Star Wars the minute they leave the theater, but they're talking about Marvel. Like Marvel is their Star Wars now. That's just how it shook out. Star Wars doesn't capture the interest for a lot of. It's not necessarily true of all children, but in the same way that I think it did for many of us.
Marvel
what
is
you wanna
also
say
is.
I'm sorry.
I'm
I was
sorry.
just say Ghostbusters, I think, might have been the closest possible like next thing that was Star Wars esque that
Could have been, yeah.
yeah.
Right. But also, I was going to say Marvel is also just basically like TV, like almost right from the beginning. I mean, Star Wars is now too, but the reason that Marvel is able to be what it is because it basically functions like TV.
Yeah, it became a juggernaut, but it
Yes.
had to they really worked at it where like it was spontaneous with Star Wars. It was a flash in the pan thing that grew organically where they're like with the Marvel, like what they've created that felt like they have worked to make it that type of thing.
Flash in the pan, the whole stove caught fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's start at the beginning. We have another Death Star. How do we feel about this?
I could tell you, as a kid, I thought this was the original Death Star that was like still left over after the explosion. Because I
Interesting.
was 3 or 4 and I didn't know any better. And I
Yeah,
was like,
the visual
oh,
kind of makes it seem like that. It's just like, oh,
yeah,
there's
it's
a
like,
big
oh,
chunk out of it.
yeah, it's broken. Yeah, they blasted a chunk and it's still going. I had no idea. It's like it's like, all right, that's why it's still there. Otherwise, in a million years, like, why would you build the Death Star again?
Well, I always kind of liked it because it's like kind of like now it's like a real like symbol of terror because like they rebuilt the structure that like the destruction of it represented like their big win. And now it's just like, look, now it's almost your win is almost erased. It's real like demoralizing just
Oh,
as
that's
a symbol.
interesting. I really like that. I never thought of it that way, but I really like that read.
It's bigger too, right? It's like twice the size of the
Well,
original
yeah.
Death
So I
Star.
mean, yes. Like if you read like the role playing book or whatever, it's like twice the size or whatever. Functionally on screen, it's exactly the same. Though it is a very striking image.
Well, let me pose this to you. It's the forest moon of Endor. So, in the like, that's no moon, that's a space station. But now it's a moon of a moon. So it's nothing. Like if you think about it, like it's not that
Just
big. It's
some
a
dumb
moon of a
double moon.
yeah. It's a moon of a moon. Come on, like that's tiny. That's nothing to fear. You're fine.
I think there's talk like behind the scenes of issues, like they didn't want to do the Death Star for the first movie, right? That was something that like Lucas had already envisioned there being a whole saga and it ends at the Death Star. But then he's like, if I only make the first one, I got to kind of throw the Death Star in at the first one.
Yeah, I mean, that's when he made the first one, I don't think there was any question that it was going to end the way that it ended. I think, like, at least 50%, like, the point of the whole exercise was to have the massive space battle at the end. So obviously it was going to end up in that first movie. When you reach the third one and you reach the end of that original plot, there's a Death Star-sized hole in the finale. There was a lot of talk and story conferences about the end battle happening over the capital city planet of the Empire, which I feel like would make a lot more sense if you want to really feel like this is the decisive blow to the Empire. The rebels have won. The reason they didn't go with that was a budgetary thing. George Lucas didn't think that they could afford or realistically pull off the effects and the sets that having a city planet would require. So that's actually one of the few things that I know he's talking about when he always says in interviews and stuff like, I had to wait to make the prequels until the technology was there to do it. And I was always kind of like, what are you talking about? I don't really understand exactly what he's thinking when he says that, except this is something that I know he's talking about. He's like, I can't do a city planet on that scale realistically. Whether or not that's true, I mean, look, I wasn't George Lucas in 1983. He obviously knew what his company could do and how far the money would go. I think it would have been cool to have seen what 1983 technology, how it would have rendered an environment like that.
Yeah, I mean, to take it back to the Death Star as, like, the opening of the movie, something I always thought, even as a kid, like, this is big. Like, we're coming a shuttlecraft out of a big star destroyer, or we're going to the Death Star, and it feels possibly like, now I can see it looks feels bigger than the first Death Star, but big doorways, big bays, big wide long shots. Like, it feels really there's like this fear of like enormous spaces sort of thing, like in space. It's all kind of there, and it feels very rigid, very controlled, very manufactured. Um, there's not that camera motion that you would see in like later Star Wars films. It's very static, locked off shots. So, some moving, but very like parallel, perpendicular. There's not a lot of twists and turns. It feels very sterile in a way, and I think that starts to build a sense of like ominous fear, that foreboding, that the Emperor is kind of like, this is huge. They have a lot of gear here. This is pretty scary. So it's a good way to lead in with always open with your villain.
Yeah, well, that's interesting too, because I think there's a lot to what you're saying, but I think that the staticness of the shots, I think, is also intentional in that, Star Wars was a movie that was really made in the editing room, and Empire Strikes Back, the shots are much more dynamic with like the takes are longer and Irvin Kershner is constantly using the camera. He's settling on new compositions and stuff. And you can't really cut around that. And I think it's no secret that George Lucas he considered himself to be more of an editor than, I don't want to say a director, but like his favorite part of the process was the editing process. And I think when you're working with a director that is not shooting for the edit, he's not getting all the coverage, he's not giving you the choices to have later in the editing room. I think that was really frustrating from an editor standpoint on Empire. He couldn't make it the way he wanted it because of the way it was shot. So I think that with Marquand, he found someone who would shoot it in a traditional way, not in a bad way, but like he would get the coverage and he would shoot for the edit, which is a valid thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because like thinking back on like the shot, there's not like a lot of dynamic things you're talking about, like camera movements, and B, just no like blocking that really stands out to me. Thinking, I mean, maybe the door opening on Luke is really like when you think of a shot, that's the one, but that's really kind of it. Maybe some of the throne room sites, but what it really reminds me is like, especially when you hit the '90s with comedies, the way those were shot, up until present day with comedy, just kind of very static, very still shots. With comedies they do for the reason of like it allows the actors to riff and improvise and things like that. It's kind of
Yeah.
like the same idea. It gives less power to the camera operator, to the person in there, but more opportunities for fixing later. And yeah, I definitely think, especially compared to Empire, in terms of like, yeah, things like blocking, camera movements, or just like composition, there's not a lot that stands out to me. As much as there was like in Empire, or even Star Wars. Again, like really just the door of Jabba's palace open on Luke is like the one iconic image I can really think of in a sense.
Josh, you did mention that one possible Mark One touch with the handheld shot.
Oh yeah, so something later on. So this shot always stuck out to me. I think the first shot when we're on the Rebel cruiser, we're inside the ship and we're following these soldier rebel guys or whatever through a hallway, and it opens up into the briefing room. That shot is a handheld shot. And I think it's the first, maybe only handheld shot in the entire trilogy. And what made me realize that was watching Eye of the Needle, because very similarly, you would have a lot of scenes where the coverage was, very standard, punctuated with these occasional handheld shots. Then once I watched Return of the Jedi again after having seen Eye of the Needle, I was like, oh, okay, like that's a Marquand shot. Like he decided, it's like, okay, and now I'm going to do a handheld and just see what I get, which again is the editor's mindset.
It also kind of reminded me of the just say circa like 1971 conspiracy thriller for a moment there. It was just like
Yeah, yeah,
the way that it
right.
comes in on there.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree that the shots don't really have a lot of presence, especially the opening. For me, always has. They kind of look like some like 70s sci-fi book cover paintings. These really kind of rigid lines and kind of flat panels. So it definitely works for me, and I feel like in the lack of motion, uh, even if it isn't uh, like a choice, even if it's more of a technical choice that they need to shoot these things more static, whether they're matte shots or not, or they're composited. I feel like it sets a certain stage because as soon as you go to Tatooine and we follow C-3PO and R2D2 going to Jabba's palace, it cuts to the shot of them walking, and it's a wide. We see the landscape, we see Jabba's palace in the distance. Then it cuts to a shot where it's a wide, and they're standing at the door on the right side of frame. It's just a big door, like it just fills the whole frame. And for me, that like Return of the Jedi is about big doors. Like that's like one of the major themes of the film. Uh, and like big doors, and it really sets the scale where you're like, all right, so whoever's behind this big door is pretty important because that's a really big door. um and like a big slow moving door, that's the other factor. Like things move slowly because they're big. It's a matter of scale, but it fills the frame, and it really does feel like more of a theatrical set piece. It feels like a stage play, because I always used to think the Phantom Menace felt like why are they performing this like it's a play? Like why are they these like little dioramas that they're in? And then now I'm looking at Return of the Jedi and I'm seeing like, oh no, this is kind of what it's always been. Like let's show the space, let's show the texture of the cracked wall, um, and that's really what we're getting here. So I think there is a character to these wide kind of shots. They really are kind of like moving paintings for me, and maybe
I don't
that's
disagree.
it's a little there's some, like, Barry Lyndon-ness to it, for me, which I love.
I don't disagree with you. Like I mean, it's a taste thing. It's a style thing. Like I'm not saying that, one is right and the other is wrong. I do think a lot of the imagery in this movie certainly is very striking. The incompleted Death Star in this movie is very striking. It's a very striking image in a way that the first one was not. I certainly think that this is um, much more imposing. And there is something to what you're saying about scale. And again, I watched From Star Wars to Jedi last night, and Mark Hamill as the narrator, but also the interview with George Lucas in that movie, they were both saying like Return of the Jedi is doing what he wanted to do with Star Wars. And a lot of that was scale, right?
It's the most Star Wars you can get.
As far as the scale that you're talking about, like I think that is one big part of Return of the Jedi is just like there's in terms of the set design, there's a huge focus on like architecture, even Ewok Village, Jabba's palace, the new Death Star. Like it's all. I think that is where all visual panache comes in.
The money went into production design for sure.
Yeah, no, I was saying the camera, like, yeah, I'm maybe a little down on the camera work, but I think the production design is the best of the whole trilogy. Although that might relate to, like, again, it's like the wheels are coming off, and this is commerce, and this is just selling toys. Aspect of it again is that's where we're kind of reaching that. It's like the B wings and the A wings are cool. Like those are such a great addition of a new thing. But is that just because but maybe not. Maybe I'm just being a little like too, you know,
I mean, I don't
yeah.
think you're wrong. There's also something to, well, if we're just doing the Death Star again, we have to make it a little different. Oh, we have to add some new fighters, some new designs, and we have to make it. I mean, that one shot, the first shot where we see all the TIE fighters, and then the next shot after it, the one where the Falcon flies through those zillions of TIE fighters, like that shot,
Yeah.
it's just amazing. I mean, it was in 1983, and it still is.
And it's not just the more ships, it's the costumes are cooler, like the commando, Endor commando costumes, and then all the aliens in Jabba's palace. It's yeah, it's really cool.
I love like their dusters with like it looks like they're like spray painted. It's a very like kind of 80s like cyberpunk style almost.
Fry, were you going to ask if they ever made a Jabba's Palace playset?
Yes.
They had a Jabba on a rolling like platform, like his little lounge area, and I think they had like a cardboard diorama. Like I could be wrong. I know they made that later for like the Power of the Force figures. They had like a cardboard diorama, like throne room setup, but and they did remake the Jabba on the rolling platform.
I had like a
Nice.
R2D2 thing that like came apart into Jabba's palace type of thing. It was like a R2D2, maybe like a foot big, and then you would open him up, and the inside was Jabba's palace with like little.
No.
You're talking about the micro machines,
Yeah, yeah,
made by Galoob, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, so I have a good follow up to lead into like Jabba's palace since we're kind of hanging out there. When that little eyeball pops out of the door, like I always like that. Was it uh, a little glowy orb pops out, flips up. Like a lot of those small details, I think was what interests me as a kid. And it always kind of like stays in my mind. But like a slow moving door, and then they walk in. It's shadowy. There's a Gamorrean guard there, and the guard's drooling when they see him, like drool like coming out of his mouth. And, I was like, "Ah, pig guy." And, like, it was as a kid as a kid, you're like, "Alright." So, they got these they're rolling in there, it's a pig guy. There's this, like, spider crawly, like, brain in jar guy, the Biomar monk moving by, and it's super dark, and I think a lot of the character, for me, of good Star Wars is, like, shadow, darkness, beams of light, which are especially in this film, a lot more like of those like blue beams of light, but also the fog and mist and whatever space opium spice they're smoking in Jabba's palace is like all floating around and like giving like so much texture. Where like sometimes you just can't see; it's like a shadow. You don't really know what's going on in that part of Jabba's palace, and it really makes it feel both lived in, which is one of the great parts of Star Wars, and it feels like you don't know what's around the corner. You don't know who's like sleeping, drunk over in the corner at Jabba's palace, and that's like for me one of the best parts of. I mean, one of the best parts about this whole movie in general is the Jabba sequence. Like for me, one of the best, however many minutes of a Star Wars film is everything related to Jabba's palace.
Well, what you're describing is like the same reason why the only special edition change that I hate, and I'm fine with almost everything else, but the song the change to like Jedi Rocks and like the
Oh, I won't
effects in that
watch it.
scene. Because like in the
Yeah,
original,
man,
like
Latinx is awesome.
yeah, Latina Kid's great. Did you I was looking at the lyrics. I can read those later if you want. But uh but yeah, like the original version, it had that feeling of like you being a little kid in like an adult space and like you're kind of don't know what's going on, but you know it's bad. And like now it's like a soft like Muppets version where with like weightless CGI and like wholesome boomer humor, like like somebody's aunt's gonna laugh at it. It's the only part where I know Star Wars as a whole is family friendly, but like it's like this like is actively not made for me right now.
It's terrifying, and also, like, you walk in, and the music that's playing, it's like Jabba's Baroque recital, I think it is on the track, and, like, I'm a big harpsichord fan, so whenever you, like, modify that and put it in space, like, the music in Jabba's palace rocks. Like, it is good music, like, Star Wars or not, I can listen to that anytime,
Except for Jedi
and
Rocks, which does
yeah.
not rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and, like, I only watched, like, the original or theatrical version, like, I don't watch any of the special editions ever, like, I've only watched them, I think, once or twice when they first came out, and I don't watch them anymore, so I'm going like, my memory is strictly the original theatrical version. Jabba's Palace is super seedy, and there's so many people in the corner, and there's other like, as I watched it this time, I noticed there's a few other women that you don't really know, who are in the corner. One has, like, split color hair, and it's just like, there's a lot of characters, like, it is a good, um like maximizing like the experience in the cantina scene. It was new, it was exciting in 1977. And like, all right, how do we do it again? It's like, well, you make it seedier, and you have dancers and you have frogs in a jar. And you got
Yeah.
this little like little goblin, like laughing at everybody. You got a little gesture. Like it's just maximized. It's great. It's like is that they took what they did in Cantina and pumped it up and made it a little, maybe a little scarier. And like Jabba is
Yeah.
an imposing creature. That's just a marvel of effects work and puppetry.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Russ and kind of bring it to something I think Fry said at the beginning when we are asking, like, is this our, was your favorite movie? Where do you rank it? And there's almost a sense of like, do I rank these movies or are they just sequences? And I like some sequences in one movie over another. And I definitely think Jabba Palace is up there. And I think a lot of it is these details that Russ is talking about that really stick out.
Yeah.
I think if like me thinking back and like you say Star Wars and one of the first memories that's going to come to me for some weird reason I don't know, except it's such a great detail is the Rancor trainer crying when the Rancor dies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why do that? But it's amazing. And everyone's sleeping. Another thing is everyone's just sleeping. They just sleep. They just pass out and
Yes.
sleep there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's something I wanted to ask about. So Jabba. I mean, this is his throne room, right? So he sleeps there too, and all of these like the hoi polloi riffraff like
Yeah.
hangers on that he just like lets.
It's a sex thing. Like it's all like.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah. It's heavily implied that it's an all night orgy at Jabba's palace. Like,
it is heavily implied. Well, you're hitting upon something here. We got to talk about the metal bikini, right?
well, even before that, Ula is wearing Ula the dancer,
sure.
I
who,
love
who is
Ula.
who is the first victim of
Rancor.
the Rancor. Yeah, she's wearing like a fishnet top, and I think even as a child is like, booby. Is that a booby? Like
Excuse
so
me,
like
booby.
yeah, so that might have been like the first like booby in a movie I even saw, and like at a young age. So there was like a level of like eroticism in this Star Wars film that just the likes have not been seen
I
at this
mean,
level in Star Wars.
sure. I would say it's a little bit juvenile, though. Like,
I was a
I mean,
child.
In like
fair
a
enough. I mean, fair
little bit
enough.
like
Target
Okay.
audience totally worked. Showing
I
all
mean,
my
like,
cards here.
looking at the Sarlacc, that's like giant vagina dentata is kind of like a little on the nose, isn't it?
Whoa,
I
I
mean,
wasn't
like,
even thinking that. Yeah, that's sick,
well,
man.
dude,
That's dark. No,
it's a
no, no,
giant
no.
hole. It's a giant like fleshy hole in the middle of the desert with it's covered in teeth.
I
I was
think we're
talking
just. I
about a
think
professional
Jabba is a
dancer.
juvenile one.
And that's why the trainer is crying.
Maybe it's just Jabba's a juvenile one. Maybe it's all just a reflection of the character that Jabba is. That he's just
Jabba's a man
Yeah.
child. And I think Mickey's 100%. Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
gangster. He comes from a long line of gangster huts, and he's young Jabba. We don't know how old he is. He's a young guy. He's just looking to have fun. He's hanging out with all of his friends. Boba Fett's in the back. When there's the point when I can't remember if it's when Ula goes down the pit or if it's when Luke later falls. Boba Fett is laughing with Jabba, and you hear Boba Fett's laugh on the theatrical cut. It's at yeah, Boba Fett laughs at 25:35. I wrote down the time code from the theatrical cut,
Really?
and you hear his
I'll have
voice.
to go.
Yeah,
I'll have to go back to that
and
because in
it's like,
that case,
oh yeah,
like
Well,
that's weird.
that how they replaced his original voice with Tim Morrison's voice, like, which I don't like, but also I think I mentioned to you guys before that the one good thing about it with the new Boba Fett is that like kind of makes it more believable because just his voice is kind of has like an inherent kindness to it that you can believe that maybe that was there along. Except that the one thing that still ruins that, even in the any new cut of that, is that when he's in Jabba's palace, he like kind of touches like one of the dancers like face like suggestively, like when it's just like, oh, what a scumbag. Like he's still like I
Yeah.
don't believe that guy is the guy that like comes out of the Sarlacc pit like
maybe he's trying to save her.
later on. Maybe.
He's like, I don't want to dance, baby. I just want to talk.
Oh my god, yeah. So I wanna ask a question. I think we've all been talking about how much we love this whole sequence of the movie, this whole Jabba sequence, which clearly the climax of which is Luke showing he's a Jedi and he's got some skills. He takes out everybody. But isn't there another version of this that accomplishes the same thing where it's like the cold open and we see Han frozen in Jabba's palace, and then there's like some kind of like a Batman like sort of like a takedown, and the jailbreak happens in the first 5 minutes, and then like Han is freed and we move on with the movie. Because in a certain way, we spend a lot of time here.
Well, I think they're modeling it after Hoth, which like I think it's the same amount of it's like 37-minute sequence in both of those movies where like it's just like okay, we can have their nearly 40-minute kind of like it is like a cold open, except it just goes on for the entire first act.
No, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. The idea that the rescue of Han, which was something that was I mean, we all knew that that was going to happen, or maybe we didn't. I don't know. But reestablishing the status quo so we can move on with the rest of the story, like that's a pretty significant detour,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Every time I watch it, I always forget how long it takes for that to happen. I'm like, I always like think it's like the second scene.
Right. But it's actually so it's a really long it's a long sequence. And I'm not saying that it doesn't work. Like I think it's great. And obviously for kids, it's very effective. It's very cool. You love spending time in the world, like you love seeing all this. And that I mean, that is the reason for it. I mean, I don't think you need to justify it anymore. I'm just kind of trying to tease out, thinking about it in story terms, like when you're developing something, you're choosing it's like, okay, well, what is this about? And obviously, I guess it does tie into the larger story, which is really Luke's story, I think, to the detriment of all the other characters. Leia and Han in particular, I think, are just kind of appendages in this movie.
I just that reminds me of the one thing, like the thing that really struck me rewatching it for the first time in a while this time is like to me, like how effortlessly, like you're saying it's Luke's movie, but to me, like Harrison Ford stole it to me as an actor.
He is fantastic in this movie.
His face does so much, like in this movie, like
Yeah.
He
his
like
reaction,
he
like
sells
yeah,
yeah, he
he
sells
sells
so
the
much
like
of
the
this.
millennium, like when that like probably the most emotional part of all three movies is him having to let go of the Millennium Falcon to Lando the last time. Just through like the
Well,
way
and
he
Yep,
acts that
yep.
scene, and you just like, oh my god, this guy loves this ship more than
but
anything.
also the scene where he's rescued.
Yeah,
I've never
Yes.
heard
by
like
by
that kind of
by
emotion from like it's just like
Yes.
he sounds vulnerable like, and that might be down to a Mark Kwan thing too because it's like I don't really think of raw performances when it comes to Star Wars, but like when he's like you can feel how like vulnerable and like relieved and like scared he is, and it's just kind of like wow, that's like I don't think I've ever heard that from like Harrison Ford ever before or since. Like,
yeah. Well, and
Chewie,
to
is that
Josh's,
you? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
That whole moment.
No, yeah, he's fantastic, and that scene, Fry, is like I wrote in my notes. Harrison Ford is so good, like exactly at that moment that you're describing. But here's my thing about Han in this movie. I mean, first of all, I don't know what he's doing leading the strike team on the ground. Like that doesn't really make sense to me. He should be flying in space. I think. I feel like that's a more natural place for him to be.
they I feel like they kind of had to explain that with the exchange of with Lando, where it's just kind of
Yeah,
like wow.
right. And the other thing, I don't know, watching it this time, it's like I kind of feel like Han should feel like he's missed a lot. He should feel out of place and
It's true.
be trying to catch up. So the last time he saw Luke was right before the Battle of Hoth. He had just saved his life, right? And he was still a kid in his eyes. And now all of a sudden he's a Jedi Knight. Years have gone by. I just feel like it's a missed opportunity to have Han have a character arc like in the movie. And Leia, she should either be leading the strike force herself, or she should be where Mon Mothma is, or she should be with Admiral Akbar running the battle. Like what we have in the movie that we got was she's just kind of running around with Han on the planet and she gets into jeopardy and doesn't really have anything to do. It also doesn't help that the thing that Leia is most remembered for in this movie is the metal bikini thing, which is
Right.
She also kills
And
Jabba the Hutt, though, so I don't know.
and
That's like a pretty big
yeah,
move.
yeah.
no, she does, yeah, but that's sort of like a plot thing, and like we don't really see her enjoying it. Like she gets revenge, like on paper,
It's just like breaking even.
Well, the
yeah,
whole the Hutt saga really exists more so in the expanded universe, whatever they call it now, Legacy. Like because Leia
legends.
killed Jabba. Oh yeah, whatever. Because Leia killed Jabba the Hutt, like there is a huge bounty on her, on Han, like everyone related, and like that just follows them through all the rest of the expanded universe or legends, whatever they want.
Yeah, and
And it's a cool point, like, that's a bigger story that follows through, so, like, I get where, like, I look at Jedi as, like, the serial nature of Star Wars where, like, you're not get everything's not perfect, they set up a lot of things, they don't really make perfect arcs, but they do leave it open, and there's more space, to explore after this film is over. I don't think there's enough time to do all that. Not saying that they couldn't attempt it, but,
but
you
it
know,
is weird that Leia does become almost like mostly damselish again, considering that the sister reveal. It's just like, oh, she is a heroic character potentially, but like her the biggest thing she does is shoot over Han's shoulder.
No, but that's something else. When she learns that Darth Vader is her father, she gives no reaction at all.
yeah, because she's not even an orphan as far as she knows, right? Does she actually think? Does she think her? I can't remember.
I'm not sure. I think they kind of gloss over that. So, but it is interesting. Like she finds out in the same moment, Luke is her brother, and Darth Vader, who tortured her, who destroyed her family and her planet and everything she knows, she finds out that's her father.
And that she's force sensitive at the same time,
She's
like
just in shock
I
for the rest of
feel
the
it,
movie.
yeah. Yeah, I think she's totally in shock. They had some Ewok wine, and they're a little bit, a little fuzzier on the edges, and they don't really yeah, it's way too much information to comprehend. I don't know what that would even look like. Their head just explodes like a Scanners moment, like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is that this movie and the other movies are like, they're not really interested in what's going on inside Leia and not even really interested in what's going on inside Han. Like, these
That's
are
true, yeah.
Yeah.
I totally
It's
They're
agree.
just,
it's
they're
the
there for like
Skywalker saga. In fact, well, it's interesting because well, not to like skip over too much of the end, but like this almost becomes like Vader. Like, you know, if you think it's like, oh, we have these three main characters, Luke, Han, and Leia. But this movie again, it focuses on Luke, but then like number two character then really becomes Darth Vader slash Anakin. It's his redemption, and that becomes a major story point. And I think that more than maybe even Luke, except it is a Luke story because he's the one trying to redeem him. But Vader becomes more of like a main character,
Yeah.
you know, in that sense. Yeah, again, at the expense of Han and Leia's development. But that's the thing. It's a movie about Jedi's, and the Jedi's are important, and the Skywalker's a Jedi. You know, is it? Yeah, kind of at the expense of like to me, like I'm more of like into the smugglers and the Reg Antilles and all that stuff. It's cool to me, but I still enjoy the movie.
That brings up like a really good point. You can enjoy Star Wars in a lot of different ways. You can enjoy like Mickey likes a lot of the peripheral characters, which are they're like Wedge is like one of the greatest characters who really gets. Lando kind of takes his a little of the glory leading the strike when it should have been Wedge, in my opinion. But yeah, there's all these side characters that are great. Or you could focus on the Luke Skywalker thing, and his issues, or you could be really into the fact that there are B wings and they look awesome. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of different things in this movie, like that I think you could focus on. But one thing, talking about the Jedi, like the Jedi Knight, like this being my first movie and not having seen any other Star Wars, I'm like Jedi Knight. So like I started off like Luke is on walking a plank. There's no coming back. There's no one coming to save them, as far as I know. I've never seen this movie before, and Luke gives the most confident signal I've ever seen. I think he gets a nod from Lando. There's a cylinder ejected from R2D2's dome. It lands in his hand. He turns it on. It's a laser sword, and he just like just pure chaos energy, and just sparks are flying. And it's like the most exciting thing I think I've ever seen in my life up to that point. Like I think the only other action movie that I was really into as a kid at that point was Masters of the Universe.
Nice.
Whatever, that's what it was. It just the timing worked
No,
out. But
nothing wrong with
so
that.
yeah, so it was Masters of the Universe and it was Return of the Jedi. And that scene, like not having seen any Star Wars, not knowing anything, like Luke's a Jedi Knight. He's wearing all black. When he's in the hologram talking to Jabba, playing from R2D2, his collar definitely resembles like a priest collar. There's just like kind of this religious element to it where he's like, it's very, very, very like honorable, very, very well spoken, very different from the Luke that we had seen previously. So it's like, yeah, Han is right when he's like, a lot's happened since he's Luke's a Jedi Knight. Like it's a wild concept, and not having seen the other Star Wars films, I'm like, yeah, he is like a Batman character. He's coming in, he's wearing dark clothes, he's fighting, he's winning, he's taking command of the situation, he's telling people what to do. This is his plan. It's pretty wild. I don't know what I started talking about here, but that's yeah,
what is the plan, by the way?
save Han. By whatever means. Now,
And then definitely do a cool move where R2 ejects a sword out of his space.
I will say this. So in Empire, Luke sees the future potentially, or sees one possible outcome of the future. Luke must have seen or had some premonition of the future, or had planned to get captured. He must have known that Jabba routinely dumps people in the Sarlacc pit. Like to have his lightsaber hidden in R2, to have his whole plan like that. I don't know. I'm not going to try to figure it out writing wise, but it's exciting. And maybe he foresaw it, maybe he didn't. Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I mean, the reason it happens the way it happens is because it's the most exciting version. Is my point.
Show me a modern equivalent of that. Like I haven't seen a movie that's excited me like that in ages. Like, that moment.
Hmm.
Action movie that's excited me like that. No, I don't think I have. Has anyone?
I mean, not recently, but definitely post Return of the Jedi, I'd say.
Yeah, like Like Die Hard, maybe?
Yeah,
No, I got nothing.
and
I
of
got
Jurassic
nothing.
Park.
Die Hard with a Vengeance?
But not.
RoboCop?
But like, I had not seen the other
RoboCop
films, and
2?
and yet I saw this as the most iconic moment ever.
RoboCop
Like
2, directed by Irvin Kershner?
Oh, yeah.
it was super like exciting for me, and it felt like something big was happening, and I just haven't had that energy from a film since, really.
Might I posit that you might be leaning on some of your childhood nostalgia for your feelings about the movie there?
You
Is
may
that
posit
possible?
that. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that my memory of the feeling of excitement, like, is locked in and loaded. Like, whenever I'm watching this, I'm like, yeah, I'm a
No, I
kid
mean,
again.
that's fair.
That's
I mean,
why
that's
that's when
fair.
these movies are
Like,
their best. That's what they're supposed to do.
yes, I agree with you. I think that these movies are most effective. This one in particular, I think, is most effective when you are that age. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. The only thing that I am trying to tease out here
Yeah,
is
I can
like
tell
what?
that maybe it's not as good as I remember. It's not as a good a film as Empire Strikes Back. I mean, that's fine. It's still my favorite.
No, that is totally valid. Like I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think that this movie has different concerns and different goals than The Empire Strikes
Yes.
Back does. And
Yes.
that one is more effective for a certain demographic than the other.
It's not the blue movie, it's the brown movie.
Right.
Well, I think, and I started saying this, and I maybe in my opening statement, but I think this is the best Star Wars film, even if Empire Strikes Back might be a better film.
That is completely totally fair and valid.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I
I'm
didn't
not
say it
even
like that,
disagreeing with
but
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's I think this is like, I think part of Star Wars is excitement, adventure, all the things Luke's not supposed to be seeking, but it's that type of energy that makes it exciting. So whether it's like perfectly written or if Luke's kick connects to that guy's head on the skiff, like that is kind of irrelevant to me. Like it's really about fun.
Well, the only thing that I will say though is that you could say the same thing about the new movies.
You could, I won't.
Right, but that's my point though. Like the only reason I think why somebody might say that about like your what you just said, like you are giving Jedi a pass on a lot of things because at the end of the day it makes you feel good and you love it, right? But like if you're going to grade Jedi on a curve like that, then you know,
I wouldn't
like
even grade the new ones, so I don't know. I mean, I think that's kind of
I feel
irrelevant.
like
Yeah.
is actually as much as I like Return of the Jedi, I actually really love like Last Jedi.
I like
And
The Last Jedi more than this movie.
it kind of directly rebuffs this movie the most in particular.
I mean, that's something I don't know if we're going to be able to get to in this pod,
Right.
but
Yeah. Save it for
uh,
that movie.
To go back, I guess, to the Jabba's palace and everything, I think I agree with Russ. I think it's great action. I think it's great action. Again, I'm not going to say there's nothing that since then, but I would say maybe from now going back 10, 15 years, there hasn't been anything like action just lacks that kind of excitement, I think.
Yeah.
And even that's me watching it now, like recently watching it, and be like, no,
yeah,
there's nothing feels. There's so much physicality to it. There's not computer generated stuff to it, and that works. And
yeah,
even if it means is there's not as many as high of a body count as there is in a modern movie, those bodies that, they do get to kill and knock in are still feel realer and better and funner overall. And then I guess the other thing if we want to bring it back to Leia's bikini, if this is trash compactor, if you want to have bad opinions, although I don't know what Star Wars like fandom is like anymore. So maybe this is a common
it's
opinion,
fucking
but
awful. It's
it is. So
awful.
maybe I'm with them, but I actually think I think the sexual politics of the first three movies and especially Return of the Jedi are fine. I actually think, in a certain sense, the male gaze, and I think there should be a female gaze too in movies, are good. I like the James Bond movies, and I'm happy when there's a new James Bond movie, in part because of the male gaze aspect of it. Is I think it's an inherent part of cinema that I don't think, as human beings, sex is part of who we are, and we shouldn't be afraid of. And honestly, from what people say behind the scenes, is that it was Carrie Fisher saying like, I've had two movies of being like just like completely desexualized because I honestly think Lucas was like I think this like for the time especially he was actually trying to do like a strong female character in a genre that wasn't like known for it. and to a point that she even had to push back a little bit and to be like, let me be a woman a little bit, kind of thing. Like, what they say is like that was a little bit of a push on her behalf. I think maybe she regretted it and how comfortable it was, but
But
yeah,
she also felt like she had nothing to do in this movie.
yeah, which is true in a certain sense. Yeah,
Yeah, so I would agree with you. Like, I don't think the sexual politics of these movies, such as it is, the male gaze is obviously baked into the cake, not only in these movies, but in the vast majority of mainstream movies, in particular in this genre. But the only thing that I would say hasn't aged really well, believe it or not, is in The Empire Strikes Back, and I talk about this on the Empire Pod. The
Oh,
the way Han kind of not forces himself, but I mean, kind of forces Leia to kiss him is not great. She says no several times. She says, like, she makes
yeah.
it very clear, like, I don't want to do this. And she's completely at Han's mercy. Like, there's nowhere she can go.
it's the implication of being alone on the Millennium Falcon in an asteroid belt. The implication.
It's okay because he has that Harrison Ford smirk. It's just like, oh, you.
At
Right.
least it wasn't half as bad as Bill Murray with Sigourney Weaver and Ghostbusters. It didn't reach that level of being pretty
Yeah.
bad.
I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world. I'm just saying that's the one thing that I think has aged a little strangely.
I think that's also supposed to be like almost a throwback in itself to like 40s. Like,
Right. It's like Errol
sort of.
Yes.
Flynn type of like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. But that's something that Star Wars does a lot, that they pay homage to something, but they're also importing all of the cultural attitudes that produced it, and they're perpetuating it. So, like, a good example is the accusation of racism in The Phantom Menace. The Nemoidians in episode 1 and how they sound like Chinese villains or whatever from like a Charlie Chan movie or something. And George Lucas can honestly say, I'm not being racist. I'm paying homage to whatever. But in so doing, without examining what those movies
Right.
were doing, you're perpetuating the racism that was there then. It's just
Yeah.
removed from its context.
I'm not being racist. I'm just doing homage to something I like. Like, but it's like, what
Right.
about the thing you like?
Well, I'd also say though that's not out of character for Han Solo in this world. So I mean, it makes like it fits for the character, whether it's a good moral interpretation of a relationship. That's not for me to question. That's the character.
Yes, except I think it's clear what the movie thinks,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah, I guess it's back to I get what they're doing. So I don't know.
I get what they're doing also. It's just that you're saying things and communicating ideas and reinforcing certain power dynamics, whether you're conscious of it or not. It's like, you can be saying something without realizing that you're saying it.
But my question is, if they say like Han Solo is based a little bit on Francis Ford Coppola, maybe Francis Ford Coppola maybe has a little bit too familiar with some people in the past or something. Maybe, yeah. I wonder.
Well, I don't want to speak ill of Francis Ford Coppola, but I mean, there were certainly stories.
Yeah.
So this got pretty uncomfortable. I want to talk about Dagobah and Yoda. Yoda and Obi-Wan, they both say to Luke, to complete your training, you have to kill your father, right? And I'm wondering, like, is that what like the Padawan Jedi trials are? Is everyone's like rite of passage graduation to be a Jedi? Like you have to commit patricide, like you have to kill. Is that always what it takes to graduate to being a Jedi?
It's actually easiest for Luke. It's usually harder for them to do it. Like in Luke's case, it's just like, no, this guy's easy to kill. Like you're not going to regret this at all.
Yeah, my dad's a boreal moisture farmer. Why do I
Yeah.
gotta kill him? He's not even a war criminal. Come on. I do think it's interesting though, because like, I never thought about it before until you raised this. It kind of like is a little bit of again like this little bit of like the prequel started coming out where like, oh, the Jedi's are kind of a pretty strict sect religious group that takes things pretty seriously and maybe too far.
Yeah.
It's really manipulative and fucked up.
Yeah.
Like they are like, no, you're not a Jedi, not until you kill your dad.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, I get it. Like Luke is a part of their whole plan. He's their only hope. I mean, this was the
But
plan.
but they are doing what the Emperor is doing to Anakin. Like
Yeah,
just
no, they are manipulating Luke, and Luke, he ends up saving the day by ignoring what they tell him. What Obi-Wan literally says to him, he says to bury your feelings deep down.
right.
Like that sounds exactly wrong.
Yeah. And even like you mentioned, like the like whole personality change that he goes through. I mean, that's also a Darth Vader-ish transition where it's just like now I'm serious man.
Yeah. No, the other thing that Obi-Wan says when Luke says, "I can't kill my own father," Obi-Wan comes back with, "Then the Emperor has already won."
Yeah.
Like, what? Like, what do you like? That's really fucked up and manipulative.
Well, thanks for nothing, little
No,
jerk.
but so it is interesting though, because what these scenes are doing are basically they're correcting the continuity error that has now cropped up that results from making Vader Luke's father, right? Because in the first movie, I think it's pretty clear that that was not the intention. So we need that moment of Obi-Wan to explain I was lying, but it was just a little white lie. Here's why what I said was true from a certain point of view. But seriously, you really gotta kill your dad. The other interesting thing that I noted on this watch, knowing where Luke ends up, not only in the Last Jedi, but also now having seen what he's up to 5 years after Return of the Jedi in the Book of Boba Fett, what Yoda says to Luke, he says to pass on what you have learned, not rebuild the Jedi according to the Jedi rulebook. What Luke learned was don't listen to what the Jedi tell you to do. I mean,
Right.
basically.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's the big part of that of the end is him trying to not kill his dad, to save his like, to
Right.
say,
Yeah.
"No, I won't." He rebels against the Jedi and the Emperor. You know, he forges his own third way. You know, he's the Bill Clinton of the galaxy.
Oh god, that's depressing. I also thought it was kind of weird the way Obi-Wan reveals that information. The other he spoke of was your twin sister, and Luke's like, Leia, it's Leia, and Obi-Wan's like, how'd you know? That revelation is kind of stepped on a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah, and they kind of like even the musical cue kind of comes in late. Like, it comes in like a few seconds after where like
Oh,
it starts to
really?
like because that's like the drop of like that information, and then it's just kind of like, aren't you gonna? I feel like you should be playing music right now, and then it's just like a few seconds later. But I was gonna going back to the what you were saying before about the third way thing. Like you could kind of just say that like Yoda the whole time is right because he's just kind of like, no, my point is to keep it loose,
Yes.
and he kind of comes back and says that in Last Jedi.
Exactly. Right. I think it's interesting because it does dovetail with kind of the fan expectation of like, oh, so after this movie, Luke, he goes on and rebuilds the Jedi, right? Like, that's actually not what he's supposed to do. We learn who the Jedi were in the prequels, and they weren't all that great. And they were actually kind of fucked up a little bit. So it is really interesting, like that whole, reckoning with what the Jedi actually are. And in that sense, say what you will about the sequels, but that component of it to me is the only way to reconcile what we see of the Jedi in the prequels and what we hear of the Jedi and see of the Jedi in the original trilogy is that like, Luke in The Last Jedi is very much the voice of the Star Wars fan who saw the original trilogy and then saw the prequels and was a little bummed out that the Jedi sucked so much.
Yeah,
Like he had the same experience that Star Wars fans had, and he's mad about it. He's like, did you know that the Jedi actually sucked and that the Emperor was right in front of them the whole time and like they fucked up and they made Darth Vader? Like what the fuck? Like that's fucked up. And he's like depressed about it.
right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that's
What?
maybe a different podcast.
I guess it's a good yeah, maybe because I have a lot to say about that in terms of why I think I really don't one of the main reasons I don't like the prequels and sort of don't like the sequels is it's just too much Jedi for me. And to me, like the Jedi started in the first movie as it's just a pastiche of like a samurai, various worlds, religions and ideas and Buddhism and balance, hodgepodge nothingness because he just wants to make a modern day mythology, but as pastiche that then culture again, because we talked about Star Wars blew up and got a hold of so many people that people needed to be real for some reason. Like
Yeah.
they actually need the religion to work for some reason and then Lucas decided to feed into it with the prequels, and they decided to focus on that with the sequels, and just like it's like no man, all it is just mumbo jumbo. Let it be mumbo jumbo so people get to wield cool swords, and it gets to be like sort of its own sci-fi version of religious, of the the hero's quest. It doesn't really matter the the actual mechanics of the mythology. Like it's like getting bogged down into it was the mistake I think of the prequels.
I agree with you to a point. I do think that if you're going to make more, you like have to make certain decisions and make certain choices about what things are and what things aren't. That said, the prequels certainly were not the only way to go. And I mean, again, like the part of the problem is in those intervening 16 years, the entire world was sort of writing their own version of what it should be. And the movies we got were a very specific depiction that did not necessarily align with what was in people's heads. But yeah, I mean, I take your point.
I think like not to go too far, but I think one of the reasons I think The Mandalorian works for me is it's a whole new lore. And it's not like this thing, yeah, they have to keep on making
Yeah,
the Jedi
finally.
and the Force work. Now we have the new lore we can kind of, riff off of and kind of do new things. And I think to the point like you were bringing up, like, do you like I would rather have the length because if we didn't have this Tatooine Jabba's palace sequence, what would we have? Would we just have more of this? Which to me would have been I would prefer the Jabba palace stuff. Not, I appreciate it, and I'm glad we went back to Dagobah just because I think Yoda's such one of the best characters in the whole series. Frank Oz is amazing. So I think it's an important scene, but I'm glad it's as short as it is and, does what it does and that's it. And I don't know what else you would add then if you shortened like the Jabba stuff.
Speaking of Yoda, the reason he's in this movie is Richard Marquand. He wasn't in the story outline or whatever. And then when Marquand showed up, he was like, "Well, you have to see Yoda again." He was so integral in Empire. Like, you need to bring Yoda back. Like you have to have some closure with that. And I think he was right on the money.
And killing
Yeah.
him too was I think key, especially if you're not going to kill Han or anyone else like that. Like I think his death is pivotal in that
Yeah, yeah.
sense.
Well, that was Lawrence Kasdan. Actually, we have to kill. Like it needs to feel.
As in what's blood.
I just that's literally a Notorious B.I.G. lyric. Someone's got to die.
Lawrence Kasdan was saying somebody has to die. He wanted it to be Han, and George Lucas was like, "No."
Keep your hands off my Han.
Well, he gave a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, he wanted this to be a happy ending, which I get, I think is valid. And he also supposedly said dead Han action figures don't sell.
Maybe, yeah. You don't know that.
Yeah,
Like
I know.
literally dead.
X dies.
Yeah. No points of articulation.
No, but that said, like, I get that. Like, I'm sympathetic to that point of view. And again, I don't think he's wrong. Like, this was my favorite Star Wars movie for my entire childhood. I think he was right. Han shouldn't die.
Yeah.
No, I
I don't see
agree.
why.
I'm
I don't
happy.
that's no-
One thing that drives me crazy every time I see it, you were talking about Han saying goodbye to the Falcon, but the scene right before between Han and Lando, where he's like, "I want you to take her. I mean it, take her. You need all the help you can get." And then Lando's like, "All right, old buddy, but I know what she means to you." And then there's a sight gag that cut to the Falcon is in the background, and you realize that they're talking about this. But Han says she's the fastest ship in the fleet. That line ruins what would have been a perfect sight gag. You think that they are talking about Leia, and then it turns out, no, he's actually talking about his ship, right? And it drives me crazy because it's just that one line. If he didn't say that, the whole thing would really
It was right
play
there.
as a yeah, it's right there. It's I mean, the way that it's staged and edited and even written, except for that one line, it's all like this is supposed to be a joke. But for some reason, you step on your own joke. I don't know. It just drives me crazy every time I see it.
Shot for comedy. I wanted to
Yeah, sorry.
Tanab. Do you ever look at what that maneuver is?
No, I don't
I
know.
found
what it is,
I think I found it. I have to look up where it was, like from the Galaxy Newsnet, like news things from like the Star Wars Adventure Journal that was published in like '95, so probably around the time like newsletter came out. And it's like this little, it's like this little trading guard like news update of like explaining what happened. And basically, like he was like on Tanab, like looking from a spaceport, and there was pirates coming to steal the resources from there. And another guy, he's like, I bet I can take care of that. And another guy that was nearby just bet him like a brewery, like the Detour Brewery, that he couldn't do that. So he's like, oh yeah, like I'll take that bet. And then he like goes up and I think he like harnesses like chunks of the ice ring of the planet and like throws it at the pirates and then like hits them with like counter nets. And then that's what does it. And he wins a brewery out of it.
Respect. Oh yeah, that's awesome.
It was actually, they were going to use that story, but then that was when they were early drop of Solo, that was going to be the whole second half of the movie, is Tanab. And like there was going to be the
That's cool.
Crimson Dawn and like Cloud Riders like fighting over resources on, I guess, like, you know, an atmosphere.
That's interesting.
That was going to be the entire, and I think they'd scoped out like they were going to shoot it in, I think, Mexico, like the rainforests of like Mexico, because it's like a jungle planet.
That's
And then
cool.
there was one other Tanab thing is in the Mandalorian. Bill Burr mentions in it, like the part where they're trying to infiltrate And that Imperial officer like starts like asking Mandalorians like information, and Bill Burr comes and saves him. He's
Mhm.
like, "You have to speak up." He lost his hearing in Tanab, which makes it sound like Vietnam. But like, that's like that doesn't sound like anything. Like, so wait, like, what is Tanab? Like, what is like? Is that a big like? What happened there? Now we're back to square one.
Thank you for laying all the Tanab wisdom on us. Like I
I was like, pause it like right when I was like, I need to find out what Tanab is. Like, what's her? And like, that's all the information I'm gonna find on it.
Siri, bring me to Wikipedia. What is Tanab? Well, speaking of Vietnam, Andor and the Ewoks.
Yeah.
This is George Lucas's Vietnam.
I mean, he was going to be part of Apocalypse Now in one way or another. He was early in the development of that.
That was supposed to be his and John Milius's movie, and they were going to shoot it on 16 millimeter. They were going to go to Vietnam while the war was still happening, mind you. And it was kind of going to be like Haskell Wexler's A Medium Cool, where he shot a lot of it at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, like, mixing docu-style with like a narrative. That's what they were inspired by. Like, they were going to go to Vietnam and kind of make this satirical Doctor Strangelove-ish docu-style movie in Vietnam. And like, if you could just imagine John Milius and like tiny George Lucas at fucking Ren and Stimpy in the jungles of Vietnam with like a couple of 16 millimeter Bolexes and Nagras, making a bonkers satire comedy. But anyway, instead of making Apocalypse Now, he decided to do Star Wars instead. But a lot of the DNA, a lot of the issues that he wanted to deal with and explore with Apocalypse Now, the quote unquote primitives winning a battle against a much superior force with superior technology, like that was always where this story was heading. And so Endor and the Ewoks, that is George Lucas's version of Vietnam. I mean, this is Vietnam for 9-year-olds. I mean, is what
Yeah.
this is.
I mean, it's kind of great agitprop, I guess, in a sense, in that way. Like
No, it is.
I mean, the good guys are the Viet Cong in this movie, and it's awesome.
Yeah. So whenever a Star Wars fan says, like, stop making Star Wars political, I'm like, bro, the original trilogy was the Empire is the US and the Ewoks are the Viet Cong. I mean, that is literally what was in George Lucas's mind. The Emperor is literally Nixon. The throne room is shaped like an oval, and that is not unintentional.
Does that make Han and Leia like the Soviets and the Chinese arming the Viet Cong?
It could be. I don't know. What do we think about the Ewoks?
I like them.
Yeah, I like them. I have no problem. I don't know. Like, I know there's hate, and I've never
Well,
got it.
They're not inherently. They don't have in a different world. Like, they didn't have to be like. I think people don't like them because they're like
Cute.
kind of like a cynical, cute, like made for marketing type of thing. But like, they don't have to be that based on this movie. Like, they have the potential to be like kind of ferocious and like a little like weird and scary.
They're
But, like,
kind of
and they
scary
don't-
looking.
Yeah, they're scary looking.
The teeth are kind of terrifying.
I like the sequence when Leia feeds a cracker to Wicket.
Yeah.
Like, I enjoy it. Like, it's like, hey, I'm gonna take off my helmet. Don't worry about it. Let's have a cracker. Like, I'm in that moment with them. Like, I'm kind of hungry. I'm watching Jedi. Like we're mostly through the movie. Like, as a kid, and also the music cues are really good. That kind of echo sound, and like John Williams' score is totally on display here. I think it's his best score.
It's
I
gorgeous,
think there are
yeah.
things in Empire that are
Mm.
fantastic. He takes them, builds on them. He builds on everything he's done before, like a lot of the effects work. The scores are so good. I particularly like the Ewok scores, and I think in combination with Ben Burtt's sound design, the score is so good here. And just like the musical cues, it is a little comedic, and because they're cute with a little bit of the comedic movements, I could see why Star Wars fans at the time might be opposed to Ewoks. But Mickey's right; they got teeth, and those things, like, they're going to eat those people. They tie them to
Yeah.
sticks, and
That's true.
they're going to cook them
No
and eat them
qualms.
with
Yeah.
those little Ewok teeth. Like,
And they can turn on a dime just by being. They're like, oh, you can charm them, and like, okay, now we're not going to eat you, which is even scarier. Like,
And the leader that
terrifying.
starts with the P, he is scary looking. Like, just his
Chief
shirt
Chirpa.
design and
Yeah,
everything.
he is.
Yeah.
I mean, the Ewoks got themselves a cartoon show. I mean, so did the droids. I mean, the two most marketable aspects of Star Wars were robots and Ewoks at the time. But Chirpa's terrifying. but fortunately, we have someone like Paplu who jumps on that speeder bike to create a distraction. I mean, Paplu, to me, is the real hero of Return of the Jedi. Um, and, but
We've
not
got
only,
someone like Paplu.
we have to be thankful for it. But it just shows you like there's a lot to like read into these Ewok. I mean, what it was it shortened backwards for a Wookiee? Like there's a lot of things like originally they wanted Wookiees for Return of the Jedi or cost, and they didn't want to bring because like Kashyyyk like Wookiees know technology. They just don't necessarily choose to live with it per se. I don't know what the actual like story behind it is, or if it's cheaper for Ewoks. I don't remember.
Well, George Lucas said, because I just watched it in From Star Wars to Jedi, he couldn't make them Wookiees because he showed Chewbacca, and he obviously wasn't a primitive, and he knew his way around technology. I still think that you still could have done it because Chewbacca was kind of removed from his home. Like I mean, to
Yeah,
my mind,
yeah.
like it still would have been fine. But I think to really underscore the thematic content, I think is why he had to make it clear that no, these are very primitive people, creatures, right? The interesting thing about the Ewoks too is that I don't know where I read this. I think it was maybe one of the Jonathan Rensler Making of Return of the Jedi, but George Lucas, his instructions were don't be afraid of cute. I think some of the initial designs were a little more fearsome. And I think that's actually an interesting move. I think, the cynical reading is like, oh, he wants it to be kid friendly to sell more toys or whatever. But I think that actually really enhances the idea that the fearsome empire is brought down. Not only are they primitive creatures, but they're also cute. Like the empire is destroyed by cuteness. I think is actually
Yeah.
kind of a delicious sort of a metaphor there, or whatever it is.
But it also sort of highlights how their underlying nature or like that they're not necessarily like cute is almost a not an afterthought, but like a layer on top of like what they were conceived as.
No, and also it's very similar to it's sort of the idea with Yoda taken to the extreme. It doesn't always look on the surface what you would expect. Yoda, the idea that this tiny little froggy creature is the most powerful Jedi master, and he's like 11 inches tall, right?
Right.
And
You can't put together a real sentence.
right, and he can't speak forwards. The idea that appearances can be deceiving. I think the Ewoks are the ultimate expression of that. The Empire would never consider them a threat, and they don't.
But you know what they got? They got those black eyes, like a doll's eye. They got, you should be you should be terrified of these little furry tooth things. Because I was looking through the Return of Jedi sketchbook, and it's all like a lot of like the preliminary concept drawings, and in there they say like there were supposed to be two types of creatures inhabiting Endor, and the Yuzums, the tall, like they're furry with like long stilt like legs. They say one is in Jabba's court.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And actually, he's kind of a rod attached to the wall. He doesn't really move a lot. He's actually highlighted in the aforementioned Jedi Rock sequence. He's the CG singer.
Oh,
Like he's the Yuzum.
So yeah,
that's
so
what
they
that
didn't
is.
do that because of technical difficulties, and like the key features were like pug nose face. A lot of the early concept designs are pretty much just like hamsters with bows and arrows, and like I mean and to me like that makes sense. I'm fine with it. And again, like a lot of people think they're too cute, they're teddy bears, but they're fierce. Like again, I'll bring up Paplu. He's an adventurer. He's a risk taker, and like also somewhat technically minded. Because if you think about it, like they've been watching the Imperials, ride their speeder bikes for a while now, and without any prompting, jumped on, through the throttle and boom, blast off. So
Right.
like smart, intuitive bear creatures.
He's also a little stinker.
Yeah, yeah. That's the best way to describe them, I think.
Mm.
Again, the point that I think like they look cute as in terms of a look, but again, I think they are kind of I guess like it's cute the way like they share the cracker with Leia or whatever. There are some cute, but overall they are fearsome creatures. And I was thinking it's kind of interesting, like compared to like maybe like ET, like he's pretty ugly, but he ends up being this nice, pure whole being
He's
of
a
kindness.
pacifist. Yeah.
Yeah, and these
Yeah.
like cute, like looking things that are furry are just like, yeah, we're just gonna like kill and eat these people. We don't care.
They're hungry, baby.
I love that one Ewok in that scene you were talking about where 3PO is having story time and he's basically recounting the whole trilogy to the Ewoks. I love that one Ewok, the old Ewok. He's like smoking a pipe or something, and he's kind of like, he's like,
Again, that
yeah,
goes back to like the Rancor trainer too. Like these just little details. That guy with the pipe,
yeah,
and then the baby Ewok terrified, like the Vader sound. He's like, "Oh god, oh god!" Like they don't have to throw these things in, and they do, and it just makes it a whole world, and it's great.
Not to go back to Jabba's palace for too long, but the Ranko thing trainer just reminded me again. I kind of liked in Boba Fett with Danny Trejo how they kind of continued that tradition. Like all the
yes,
trainers just kind of have an attachment to the Rancors because he kind of like
yeah,
baby talks his own. So I
Yeah,
guess it's how
Rancor
all the
trainers are
Rancor
like
trainers are.
they're the pitbull owners of that universe.
Yes, exactly.
right, right. And it's interesting too because what Danny Trejo says about the Rancor's nature retroactively makes you feel really horrible for this Rancor. It's like the only reason
Yeah,
he's like this is because they're mistreating him and he's he's hungry and scared and he's like, okay, if I have to sing for my supper or whatever, they're not fierce unless you treat them badly. It's kind of poignant and sad. Something cool with the Ewoks and Endor is like, similarly, the ATST kind of gets its moment to shine. It's like you take the AT-ATs from the beginning of Empire and you have like the mini versions.
Yeah. That's again, like we were saying before, just cool production design. That's just an awesome looking, fun thing, It's like, yeah, and you could say, yeah, it's gonna be a cool toy, and maybe that's why, but it also is just like, yeah, one of those things that as a kid just sticks out of more than anything in your mind is like, man, these cool things
yeah,
and these two legs that can shoot lasers and
And also a lot of the effects, like there's this one shot where the ATST is walking forward and then the camera pans over to a bunch of stormtroopers running and like there was no computer motion tracking. Like they created this shot where they had to manually make that camera move with the go motion, the stop motion, but the animated model of the ATST. Like to have a moving shot like that doesn't even call attention to itself. Like it didn't have to move, but the fact that it moves and you don't even I mean, it's so invisible, it doesn't stand out, like just makes you buy the reality of it so
yeah,
much.
That's a lot of the effects in this movie, especially like, we were talking about the space battles, compositing that many ships. It was the first time they'd ever done that many in like single shots. And it's just like for seconds, mere seconds on screen, they're compositing, like 15, 18 ships in a shot around the Millennium Falcon. And it's gone in a flash. But the impact of that shot, and it really is, I think, some of the best looking physical effects composited work like in any movie. And to me, it just reads better than like any kind of CGI versions I've seen. I've yet to see a CGI version that I guess maybe you could say like in Rogue One there are elements that do feel a little bit. That one is the only one that I recall where where the ships actually feel and have the kind of weight that I think they need.
but he CG'd over physical models in that. I think that's why.
Yeah,
right. And
yeah,
they
and
probably
like
did some of that, put
yeah,
like a purposeful, like looking like stop motion or puppetry, like with the CGI.
and Jedi's unmatched in those effects. Yeah, and I was just gonna say like it's that seamless ATST that's it's walking. It's like yeah, it's just part of the story. It's not we're not showing off the effect. It is really is designed to be forgotten. Like if you're thinking about it, it's taking you out of the story, and that's kind of what's great about where Return of the Jedi got to.
I do still like the look of the speeder bike chase too.
I mean, it's straight up awesome. I love the sound of it too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's just like
So
this, like
it's a
you can like
P-38 Lightning.
what?
Oh, is that what it is?
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
well, that mixed
That's
with
a.
something else. Ben Burtt mixed a
and a
P-38
slide
Lightning.
whistle.
Yeah, something like that.
Did you see the animatic that they made before? Like they make like a little miniature model just to get the shots right with the action figures.
Yeah, they feature that very heavily in From Star Wars to Jedi. And that as a kid, like watching that was one of the things that made me realize, like, oh, maybe this is something I could do.
It had a DIY look to it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like
yeah.
yeah.
Speaking of the Spider's Beak chase and all this stuff is like, I was almost white knuckling. I haven't seen this in so long. I hadn't seen Return of the Jedi in like 10 years, maybe 12. And I was one of those people like, nah, no, physical effects better than CG. And I'm going to, and you know, and I always say that. But then I turned this on. I'm like, am I going to be proven? Am I going to watch this and be like, ooh, yeah, this isn't as good as I remember as a kid after the last 15 years of CG stuff. And I saw nothing that like it was good. It's better. Like I appreciated everything this did. And I was, I think, especially worried about the speeder bike scene of that just going like, yeah, that was clearly just going to be some people in front of a blue screen. And it wasn't. It was like, it's so much better than I even remember how well it was
Well, you get
done.
like the full like sense of like that expansive space, and it also, but without any sort of like CGI hanging over it. Like it's like you can tell it's a real
Yeah.
space, but it just goes on forever and ever.
I
Like,
think the
I
only
think they
yeah, the only thing that I felt like was like a little iffy was the AT-ST on the logs, getting tripped up on the logs.
That's so funny though, because both of those were animated by Phil Tippett. So there is
the
some
master.
of Ed two. Yeah, so there is some of Ed 209 in this
nice.
that animation. It's the same artistic creative mind. It's the same hands manipulating. But that shot actually, Mickey, I love that shot because like the I mean, I think it works. Like it doesn't stand out to me as you know, not passing muster or whatever. But that aside, the believability aside, like the the amount of work that they had to do to make like to track the ATST, the animation of the ATST, it's so painstaking for this shot that lasts, I don't know, less than 5 seconds on screen.
Yeah, but it's worth it. All of
No,
that
it's
is just
totally worth it.
yeah.
It's described in detail in the Jonathan Rinsler making of, and it had been alluded to in other places, but they called it Black Thursday, where basically they were zeroing in on completing the shots for the end battle and stuff. And this one day, George Lucas shows up and he just like threw out half the shots and was like, you have to do them over again. You know, like it's not good enough. And Joe Johnston and Richard Edlund and other guys at the shop, they got plastered and stayed up all night and like were really pissed off. But then they went back to the drawing board and recreated all these shots. I think Russ, you're right. Like this is the zenith of this kind of expertise and technique for so many reasons. It's like the pinnacle of this kind of technology, this kind of work, these particular creative artists' skills are being harnessed to the absolute limit of what they could do and what the technology could do.
And you hit the nail on the head. It's really like all of these effects are in service of stories, visual, like seconds, moments. And because they didn't have to worry about, like achieving this one little moment, well, we could do this whole, we could have shield generators over entire, walking army troops. And it just, limitations are really, I think, what made it so sweet and so tasty. It really like you're getting a little bit, but it's done so well. It's done the best they could possibly do with the technology at the time. I don't think CGI is necessarily not done the best they can do at the time with the technology, but I think it's looked at differently. I don't think it's treated as a sweet savory morsel, or like a dessert, like a little like a tiny little aperitif, like a little like
Yeah, no,
yeah.
no, no. Well, I think you're exactly right. Like, contrast this with the opening space battle at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, which is, I think, the nearest Star Wars equivalent. And actually, in terms of the
Mm.
throne room dynamic, is actually you're supposed to see this, as sort of a mirror of that sequence. I mean, it is impressive in certain ways. That first shot, like the first shot where you're following the two starfighters and then they go down in and reveal the battle. It's like there's so much happening, and that's one shot. And you follow along with the two fighters weaving in and out of all this stuff. And you just subconsciously know like that shot is impossible.
That's it. We know it can't happen.
And there is no restraint because and I think you're exactly right, like, there were limitations, like, physical limitations that, were there from the technology, and when you approach CGI as, like, a magic button, fix it all, we could do anything. How do I say this? Like, with the way they had to get these shots and do all this work to get these little moments, it really makes you think about every shot, every frame, like, does this need to be here? Should this be here? How does this work with everything else?
You're forced to edit before you even start, and that's really like it's like this it's like you're editing the visual effect because of your limitations of resources. It's just, yeah, it's just like refinement. Like the thing you're getting has been filtered through so many passes, so many ideas and concepts, and people saying yes, no, yes, maybe, and just and or even having to rework it. I mean, like humans are a finite resource in filmmaking, and to make it the team redo what they've just sweat over, you know, and bled over because it wasn't good enough. Like that, I mean, maybe that's pushing it too far. But the end result of Return of the Jedi, like I think it really, like Mickey said, it stands up. It holds up, and like, yeah, there's a few moments in the speeder bike chase that I look at. I'm like, yeah, they're on two kind of bouncy speeder bikes. But I do remember as a child going to MGM Studios, and they had a speeder bike set up at the Star Tours area. And I just remember thinking, like, this is the coolest thing. As I sat on that, and I was like, speeder bikes are awesome. This is great. The design looks cool. They hold up. And my memory of the excitement of the film, and I think it was in the Leonard Maltin Star Wars interviews with George Lucas before the THX remastered VHS version.
Yeah.
Um, Lucas had said, like, you know, Star Wars 77 was bright and sunny and in desert, and then Hoth was icy and cold, and then Jedi wanted to be green. Like he wanted those differences in
Yeah, the
environments.
browns and the earth tones
Yeah,
yeah.
and to have the speeder bikes going through that space, and I think it was a steady cam that they used
Yes.
going through the redwood
The
forests. Yeah.
the
Hmm.
inventor of the Steadicam, Garrett Brown. Am I pulling that out of my ass? Is that his name?
It's Garrett something.
Yeah, but anyway, the Steadicam was a new thing. I think
She was in
Kubrick had
Halloween.
Garrett Brown, you're correct.
It was Shining, right? It was Shining, and then Rocky, and then this,
Yep.
basically. Yeah.
Bound for Glory. Yeah.
yeah, they were trying to figure out how to get these shots, and they were like, "Well, let's call up the guy that invented the Steadicam and see if," because like that was the only way that they could figure how to do it, and it looks amazing.
Yeah.
It
Looks
really is a good
perfect.
match.
He did a frame, like a step or something. He took a step and took a
Yeah.
frame, and took a step and did a
Yep.
Right.
frame. And then they played it at 24 frames per second back with the composite or something like that. So
Let's give you that
yeah,
high speed motion. Yeah.
yeah.
And it works. And we hadn't seen any motion like that, I think, in movies up to that point. Like no one had achieved that visual effect of that
That's
speed. And yeah.
like the evolution of Star Wars special effects kind of reminds me of like the evolution of like original NES graphics. Like if you look at the original like NES games, so like the ones that were released in like the late 90s, it's like they did everything they could possibly do with that technology. But also I was gonna say like about CGI, like the thing about that is that like I guess it's not so much of an issue now, but like through the history of the last like 20, 25 years, like people just also ignored the limitations of it. They thought like they're like, oh, we can do this. Like we did. It was like, no, it looks like shit. Like, but like they think that they can do it.
100%. Like I think the problem with it is you don't. It's like you need to put your own limitations on yourself to get the best results out of it. You need to be judicious with how you use it, when you use it, and not use it as a crutch.
And I guess one thing, especially watching the Star Wars movies, like like something I don't understand when they use CGI is like I don't understand why we replace matte painting with CGI. Like to me, it's just
Yeah,
like watching these
yeah.
movies. Like matte paintings are perfect. I don't get why we ever
When
Yeah,
they're really done
switch.
well,
Like
it's
it's
like
something you don't
Well, they do
actually need
digital
CGI for.
mats.
Yeah, but I guess that's maybe I'm more complaining about digital than actually like that's my issue. It's not
Yeah.
CGI, but digital.
Oh, well, that sort of ties into what I was about to say. I do have to ask because I ask myself this a lot of the times, like, how much do you think we have a bias because this is the aesthetic that we were raised on and, we're more accepting of them as quote unquote realistic versus CGI or digital techniques? Because, for example, like I was talking to somebody and they were talking about a shot in one of the new movies and how the effects like weren't up to par. And then I was like, well, sure. But if you look at, for example, the AT-ATs in The Empire Strikes Back, like those don't look real. You can tell that it's an effect. So my thing is, I think with a movie like this, a heavy special effects movie, the buy-in is you're either willing to go with it or not.
I think for me, it's like it's not does it look real or not, but it's physical. I know it's a
Yeah.
physical thing. And that's I guess for me, like I guess I have nothing against CGI if you want to say. It's just to me, it's almost a different medium. To
Yeah,
what
it's
to
a
like what I think
animation.
cinema is going back to the Magic Lantern, to the Zoetrope, if you will. It's like it's a physical thing, and everything that's ever been done with special effects, minus animation or whatever, up to this point, besides CGI, was like you were doing something physical with a film strip, and you were getting something finally onto a film strip by filming something in real life onto using light and that whole physicality. Like again, the physicality of it. I think that's what cinema is, you know. And then when you hit 1990 and all of a sudden you're like, it's a video game, like, and all like video games are cool. And maybe that's the age thing. Maybe that's us growing up with. I grew up with cinema, with filmmaking, and I didn't grow up with video games. And maybe that's what. And that no, you might be right. And that maybe that it's not so much related to like a movie bifurcation. It's a video game. It's when video games became big bifurcation.
What you're reminding me of is I think it's the Ben Hameen essay about the aura, art in the age of mechanical reproduction,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
That, the aura of the object, once you can mechanically reproduce it, you lose the aura that the work has because the art is an object, it's like created and it's imbued with all this stuff. And then as soon as you can basically recreate it through photography, and you have a representation of it that's a stand-in for the quote unquote real thing, you're missing the aura that the object was imbued with, and you're making it less special. And I'm wondering if there isn't something along those lines to what we're talking about. Film in and of itself, like the medium of cinema, like, what is a movie? There is no genuine article, like maybe the negative, but like nobody watches the negative. So what actually is a movie? It's actually not a real physical thing. It's like a sculpture in time and light and shadow that is experienced in real time.
I think it's experience. I think experience is the key word, right?
Yeah, so but it's interesting because it's not an object, like, it doesn't have the aura. So it is really interesting what you're saying, Mickey, but again, I have to ask, like, is it a distinction without a difference? Like, maybe to
No,
to
I
our eyes?
I think the difference is, you said it before, is that like it's an impossible shot. Like usually if anything we find wrong with CGI, it's either an impossible shot or it's presented as an impossible shot. And it just doesn't like that's why it would seem off in one way or another. Like, so we have a concept of what a possible and impossible shot is. And one fits and one doesn't always.
No, I think you're right, because you look at the way The Force Awakens, a big part of the marketing was how, like, they're going back to practical effects, they're going back to, like, the old school way of doing things, like, blah, blah, blah. There was more model work in The Phantom Menace than there was in The Force Awakens, but the way that they use it is very different. They use it like the Plinkett, the Unkar Putt, I don't know what the fuck his name is. The guy that's 4 more portions or whatever. That guy. He's Simon Pegg in a latex mask, but they use CG to animate and articulate the mouth and some of the expressions. So they use it in a way, so it is real. It was really there. It's on set, but the judicious use of CG, they use it sparingly to augment what is there, which is, I think, a better use of the
Well, that's like
technology.
yeah, that's like the new Dark Crystal the new season of Dark Crystal that was on Netflix as the prequel to the original film. They're still using pretty much identical puppets, Muppets, but they're doing the eye blinks, I think, and some other minor things which I actually didn't perceive. It still felt very puppety, and I think it's the thing. I think part of very often a lot of my issues are that like I'm living in my nostalgia for the past. I think one of the things people want to see out of Star Wars, and it did happen in The Mandalorian, is seeing puppets that aren't perfect or seeing kind of like janky puppet movement. I think part of that artifice, that physical artifice, is what Mickey's looking for, what I'm looking for. Like, I kind of want to see it done physically, even if it's not perfect, because the same light that's hitting that Muppet is hitting the actor in the scene. And that's our experience. The experience we're getting out of that is closer to reality than when you're making a perfectly seamless ship fly across a pond in whatever Last Jedi, or no, sorry, Rise of Skywalker. I think is that shot of the X-wings flying over the water at Poe Dameron. Like I felt
I actually
nothing
think that's
watch.
I actually think that's The Force Awakens that you're
Oh
talking about.
yeah, I don't know. I can't remember. Those movies blend into one big blur. But yeah, it doesn't read like anything to me because it's not. And if that were done of practical effects, it would be a model composited over water. But for whatever reason, the light hitting a plastic painted model is still reading better composited for me than the CGI. So when we're watching that space battle and like I don't know, it must be like small animation when the Emperor's like your friends are failing and looking out the window. I don't know what we're actually seeing out there. Really micro models or little like hand drawn 2D animation. So I don't know what that was actually.
Yeah, I think it's probably a 2D animation. Like it may even
Yeah.
just be
Yeah, like
like
little spots of light.
like
Yeah.
razor
Yeah.
cutouts on like a
Yeah.
sheet of glass or something.
Someone's got an overhead projector and they're just doing a scroll and they're rolling it in the background.
So you just said something that I think you hit the nail on the head actually. The difference
Finally.
is I think the difference is perfection. Perfection, real, true perfection, like true symmetry, like true straight lines, true right angles. They're unnatural. They read to us subconsciously as unnatural. So when you have a physical model, you have all of the real natural imperfections of
Yeah.
the way the light interacts with the surface. And the lines are straight, but like real straight, not computer straight.
To the eye.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, think
Uh,
about the way the speeder bike scene would have looked if it was CGI, like perfect today, like CGI. Like, it
Ugh.
would have looked cool in its own way, but it wouldn't look
Yeah.
Yeah.
like it does, like the cool way that it does actually look, because that is real physical space that they're flying through.
Yeah, well, what comes to mind actually when you just said that is that sequence in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull when the chase through the forest. You know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah.
And that looks fake.
Right, exactly.
Which is a weird
Well,
thing to say. Because
well,
I mean, this is also obviously fake.
But it's like the parts are all real, and then they're just composited.
Yeah.
well, you mentioned the Phantom Menace effects, and there's that one effects where, like, in all like on the original DVD that came out in the BTS footage, they show that they painted all these matchstick heads different colors in this
Yeah.
in the arena in the podcast race. Wow, Pod Racer. We're doing the podcast. They were pod racing in the arena. And they're all and someone's underneath just jiggling matchstick colored matchstick heads, and it reads as more realistic to the eye. Unfortunately, in that movie, because of the camera they used, I feel like a lot of the effects got flattened and a lot of the life taken out of them anyway. Because also it was like what rescanned later and digital effects were applied. But they were doing hand painted things that were then digitized later, but they were still, it still has that element that's a little bit more organic. Whatever human nature algorithm is flipping those matchsticks on the bottom is more realistic than some sort of animated sequence of little tiny heads bobbing, I suppose.
Though, Russ, you were right the first time. They're doing the podcast. Now this is pod racing. I'm sorry,
I,
everybody.
I'm glad I opened that up. That
Look on your face
opportunity for
afterwards,
you.
like, what have I done?
What's really interesting about that is that for my money, The Phantom Menace feels the most quote unquote Star Warsy of the prequels. And I think it's because it was shot on 35 millimeter film stock. Like if you watch a print of The Phantom Menace, I mean, it may be just for people of our generation and older, it feels more quote unquote real than the version that you watch on streaming where it has all the digital noise reduction and they try to make it look like the other two prequels, which were shot on 2K digital video, which is
Yeah,
wild to me.
sorry,
The
that's
idea,
what I was thinking of. Yeah, I was thinking of the other films. Phantom Menace was shot in 35,
yeah.
but it still had that digital intermediate like post.
Yeah, but so it's interesting in some corners of the internet there are fan film restorationists, and if you look at the prints they have acquired and scanned of episode 1, when you see it not what we're used to seeing, which is like the streaming version that has been digitally scrubbed and everything looks kind of waxy. Like when you see it on film and it produces the colors the way that a film print does, it feels more like the original films did because I think of that quality.
Well, it's back to Mickey's point. It's that plastic medium. It's like film shot on film feels like film because it was on film.
Yeah.
But that said though, I mean once again, like is that
That's Star Wars.
but like is that something that will die with us? I mean like is that a thing that
Oh,
actually
oh yeah, a lot of things are
matters?
I mean, there'll be hipsters 50 years in the future who will like, there'll
Yeah.
be like some small collection. They're like, yeah, vinyl's better. And man, they used to have this thing called 35
Right.
millimeter. And everyone else will just be like, yeah, okay, whatever, man. Just gonna go watch Iron Man 10.
I guess what I'm really asking, and maybe there's
Iron Man
no
X.
answer here. Iron Man X, yeah. I guess there's no real answer here, but like, is there something inherently preferable, like in a vacuum,
Yeah, I think so.
to practical effects?
Yeah, I think there is.
Yeah.
I think I don't have the
Yeah.
language. I think philosophically, honestly. I think
Yeah,
there is
there's something
something
that just
I
appeal just
I think
a physical thing.
I sleep
yeah,
better at night knowing it
that's
was a physical effect. Yeah.
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 Like, would you rather get like an e-card or like a physical card? I guess I wouldn't want either of those because what are you gonna do? But what I think people that want a card, I think they want a physical card.
You are reminding me of a debate that I had with someone on the Force.net Jedi Council message board in like 2003 that is still there. Some guy was like,
Nice.
so this was right after Attack of the Clones. I was like, why would you make the clone troopers CG? It's so easy to make, a physical suit. And like a lot of those shots, you didn't need them to be CG when you could have just had the physical suit. And some guy was arguing with me that it was just as good and there's no reason to make a suit. And I was like, but no, like the more real things you have in the image, the better. And the guy was like, no, like there's no difference.
The argument is he's saying, I don't see the difference. What is he accusing you of lying about seeing the difference? That like you see the difference and he doesn't. Like,
But even
No,
if
well,
you
I mean,
don't
I think
see
I
the
One of you has
difference,
good taste. I don't know.
yeah,
but no, but even if you don't see the difference, I think there is something metaphorical. I don't know if that's the word I want
No,
to
no,
use.
it's in your bones.
Better.
You feel it
I
in
mean,
your
there are also people that
bones.
won't turn off the motion smoother on their TV when they get it. So
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
Well,
good
it's
point.
like it's funny. Like people are pointing out, there's like a whole thing now where people are saying like the Euphoria creators, like, yeah, I'm shooting on 35 millimeter, and people are like, yeah, you get it on HBO Max, like
Right.
it's so compressed, like why? But I'm like,
I
no,
could
it's
see
just
the
I
grain.
think the cinematography.
yeah,
I
especially on
think
my
the way it's
projector, I
gonna
can see it.
like the way your lights are gonna
I
play on a 35 millimeter. It doesn't matter if you're capturing the whole thing when it comes off HBO Max or not. There's other aspects of it being physical that affects it other than just the
the
pure look of
yeah.
what you get in the end product, or the way actors will react to it. That could be an argument to that guy. Is like, does it matter if it looks just as good? I'm like, yeah, it looks just as good to us getting it in our eyes, but then the actors who are composited against it will react differently to 100 extras than
Yeah,
they are
their
to
performance doesn't look as good, and you just don't know because you don't you haven't
yeah.
seen it.
Yeah, apparently season two of HBO's Euphoria was shot entirely on Kodak Ektachrome film. I know
Are you
I looked it up
serious?
because
Yeah.
yeah, so they wanted the first season though it wasn't shot entirely on film. Certain sequences were, but they pushed and pushed and got the whole season 2 shot on film. And I got to tell you, it looks like it, and it looks fantastic.
Yeah, I love
Um,
that show.
and that's yeah, and that's like, and it's right, like whatever's happening between the lens and the film plane, and how it's compressing and chemically mixing, and like how skin tone looks and how the edge of a face will drop out of focus, whatever that is, all those things, it's the same for me as an ATST stumbling on a pile of logs that are composited in a second shot. Thank you, Phil Tippett. It's just like, and also even like an Empire, like they were shaking the table as they were doing the shots to give like an extra blur, like a motion blur to the stop motion, which was like a kind of a new innovation for them. It's like these little things I think will always add to that feeling you get watching it versus like yeah something super smooth. Even when you apply film grain back to a CGI effect, you're just painting in film grain, and it's not there's no physical process happening there. Maybe in the future, certain algorithms. I know there's gate shutter and things that have been added to digital from certain cinematographers. Um, I think that happened. The cinematographer for Knives Out, working with Ryan Johnson, has like a certain process to replicate film, but ultimately you're replicating it versus it actually happening in camera. Um, all that being said, it actually brings me back to thinking the throne room on the second Death Star. So the Emperor's sitting in this giant chair. The throne room is really interesting because it's on this giant spindle off the face of this thing, and that's really the only argument I can think of for actually having built out the Death Star. In my opinion, if you're going to build a second Death Star, and this happens later in kind of in Dark Empire in the series, just build the weapon and build like a frame around it. You don't need to build an entire space station. Like it's a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of guys.
Well,
Just have your star destroyers and just build the gun. Just build the center portion, and you don't have like
but was that
and
all
just
part of their ruse though, or like they're like they didn't even know this is operational?
well, yeah,
I
that I
mean,
mean, the ruse is part of it, but like that's a lot of time and money. Granted, they're conquering worlds and enslaving people and taking all that to build their weaponry, but like why build the whole thing? Just build the gun. That's
No, I
just
mean,
my
you're kind
beef,
of
you know?
right, actually. That actually would have made it a little more interesting, I think, if they were like, okay, we're obviously not going to rebuild that whole thing again because it took 20 years, but we are going to we are going to rebuild the gun, and that's really all we need.
Much easier to defend a gun than an entire space station, too, you know?
Actually, in the original rough draft of Return of the Jedi, they were trying to destroy a gun that was on the forest moon of Had Abaddon, which was the name of the Imperial city planet. And it was a defense thing that the rebels were going to land on the moon of the Imperial city planet, take over the gun, and turn it onto the
So
Imperial
the
capital.
guns in
So they
Navarone.
scrapped that for a
Yeah, I
demo.
was gonna say it's guns in Navarone,
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
is
I mean,
cool.
that's
Like, if you're
pure like
gonna-
riffing on World War II like mission movies. Like that's kind of awesome.
I'm down for that.
I mean, that's cool. Like again, the reason we didn't get that is because George Lucas didn't think that they could do the effects of the city planet. Maybe
Well,
he's
then
right.
put it on an empty planet. I don't know. Put it on not an ice planet, but put it on the forest planet. Just just do the thing you can do, and then matte paint in your giant gun. It would have worked. I would have been for it.
To be clear, the giant gun was on the forest moon. Like that was
Ah.
like the defense.
Oh, but it would be destroying the city planet. You're saying?
Yeah, right. Right.
I gotcha.
So they were going to land on the moon and take over the gun, and instead of shooting it outward, like they were going to turn it inward.
The problem is, like, had Blade Runner come out earlier, they'd have been like, oh, we can do an industrialized city planet, like no problem.
Yeah, and the irony of that is that in Attack of the Clones, a lot of like the underbelly of Coruscant is clearly influenced by Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Yeah. With Turnbull, I think he already said no to Star Wars. They got Turnbull, Douglas Turnbull. Is that his name?
Oh,
He did the Blade Runner series?
yeah, Doug
like,
Trumbull. No,
like I think Lucas asked him if he wanted to work on Star Wars, and he's like, "Nah, I'm good."
I think he was. I think he was busy on another thing. Doug Trumbull
Probably Blade
who
Runner.
just passed away recently. Yeah, he did Blade Runner. He also did Star Trek: The Motion Picture. He obviously he
Close
famously
Encounters.
he directed Silent Running, I believe.
Yes.
And he worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is really like the progenitor for all this stuff. Like all these guys saw 2001: A Space Odyssey and started to get into this.
Well, Silent Running has some of the best pre-Star Wars like droid robot situations going on. I mean, a lot of people would look at his robots and say like R2D2 is just totally a riff on the Silent Running Dewey drone.
The studio that released Silent Running tried to sue 20th Century Fox,
Yeah.
saying that they ripped them off, and they lost, or they settled out of court. I don't know. But I think the final thing here, let's talk about Vader, Luke, and the Emperor, and that whole confrontation. First of all, I think Ian McDiarmid, who was only 37 years old when he played the Emperor in 1982 or whatever, I think he's fucking phenomenal. I think he is
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah, I think like the best actor in the series, like actor, like like Harrison Ford's got his mojo going on, but he's like, and into the prequels, I think too, he is.
No, yeah, he's also one of the highlights of the prequels. Like the idea that this guy was 37, he's our age.
Right.
and he gives this incredible performance. I mean,
feel so old.
You don't have
Well,
a weird
well-
emperor face.
Yeah.
Watching him, watching him and the physicality, it's just like that to me. This is why the Oscars don't matter. That's an Oscar-winning performance right there. Like it's transformative of a person, and just I don't know. As a kid, that was the scariest thing I'd ever seen. That character, just like this guy's
Yeah.
ugly and terrifying.
To me, it's definitely like a theater actor doing theater actor stuff in a movie, and somehow it works because it's so foreign.
It
type
fits
thing. And it's
'cause it
definitely to me, it's
fits- yeah, but I think
experimental
it-
theater acting or something, you know?
no,
but it
because
kind
it
of-
fits. Yeah,
yeah.
it fits what Fry's talking about. Like this calls for theatricality.
Yeah, totally.
I don't think not from everybody. Like it couldn't be for
Yeah.
everybody, every character doing that.
Right.
Like
Right.
it fits from the villain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can see Chewie doing.
Was anyone else
Hamlet.
also like confused, like when like you were a kid and Phantom Menace came out, and you're like, I don't understand how the same actor who is clearly like
Yeah.
really old in Return of the Jedi
And then
is like
that's
playing a
when I
younger
found out that he was
version,
like,
and I'm like trying to figure who is this guy? Like he was like 80 in Return of the Jedi. I'm very
That's funny. So what do we think about the whole dynamic here? So the Emperor and Vader are trying to turn Luke to the dark side. Do we think Vader thinks Luke is going to join him still when all is said and done? Is this like a three-way sort of a game of, everyone has competing motivations here and they're...
I think Vader's kind of on autopilot in a way. The whole from probably before, like even before when Luke gets there, when he meets him, like kind of like 2/3 into the movie. I think somewhere between Empire Strikes Back and there. I don't think he's like even. I don't think he's even thinking about like he's just kind of like he doesn't even know what he's thinking.
Vader knows his limitations with the Emperor, is what you're saying. Like he knows he can't
Yeah,
go.
like
Yeah,
but he's literally. I don't think, I feel like his brain literally can't think past like what's happening or what's going to happen because he knows like he doesn't want to kill Luke like in the back of his mind and he doesn't.
Oh, I see what you're
He
saying.
can't. So like he's just kind of like on autopilot. Like it's just what he's been doing, and then finally at that last moment his brain fires up, and he makes his decision.
Do you think he realizes that the Emperor wants Luke to kill him? I mean, actually, I don't even know if the Emperor wants Luke to kill him. Like, I think the Emperor wants the stronger one to win. And if that's Vader,
Yeah.
it's Vader. If it's Luke, it's Luke.
Yeah,
Obviously, Revenge of the Sith and Count Dooku didn't exist at this time. You know, you can imagine, like, he's got to see what's going on here. I mean, he's seen this happen before.
Yeah, because I think for Palpatine, like it's like one of those things is like if Luke wins, Luke is the more powerful. He's the foretold one who's more powerful, and he gets him as an apprentice. Or if Vader kills Luke, then he just like I mean, there's obviously some sort of psychological thing he's had on Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, his entire career or whatever, and it just will give him. It's more and more of him having power, like some sort of psycho power over Darth Vader of like, yeah, I made you kill your son. You're never going to overstep your bounds with me, type of thing.
Yo, dude, that's true. That's as fucked up as what Obi-Wan and Yoda are trying to get Luke
yeah.
to do.
No, it's the same
Everyone-
thing, and they're doing like it's
everyone
and
wants
so it
Luke
really
to kill
is Vader
Vader.
and Luke together. Like they are kind of almost like this, like two forces pushed into this. And I think you're right. I think it's this three-way where like Vader knows that Palpatine, or Vader thinks at least that Palpatine actually wants Luke to kill him, but Vader's probably playing a game of like, but what if I can get Luke to kill Palpatine, and it's the two of us against the world? And then Luke is like, what if I can get Vader to kill Palpatine, and then it's me and my dad back for the good side?
that
You
could
know,
be.
like that's
See, I almost think of him as like a cult member. Like he's just kind of
Yeah.
like going through his programming. So he's not even thinking about like if he's trying to get Luke to turn against him. Like he doesn't have the tools to like kind of like think about that until he finally kind of makes himself.
yeah, which is why he probably talks about destiny a lot. You know, it's like, well,
Yeah.
no, whatever happens, you know, it's destiny. Can't
Not
you
my
know.
fault. Destiny. You know?
Yeah.
That's actually very interesting. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it from both Fry and Mickey. Like I think that yeah, it's like he's going through his cult programming and like he doesn't have the framework to even understand what is going on because
Yeah,
he's
he's
so
gotta, like
deep.
He's like thinking like in a certain language, like in certain terms.
He was also a child when he became Vader. Like he doesn't have any of like these adult like cognitive skills to
Yeah.
handle it and be clouded by the dark side. Yeah.
Last time it was normal, it was Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, something that I think both Empire and Return is missing is a Grand Moff Tarkin character. You know, like this kind of like Vader, and the Vader's relationship to the Empire and to the Emperor is this cult religious thing. And you know, the reason why Moff Tarkin was like this even more ultimate bad guy to Vader was that he's like now he's playing his own political game, and you know, there's like more of a political aspect to his relationship with the Emperor and to the Empire. And I know they were saying there was like early drafts where Moff Gerard, or however you're supposed to say his name, was
Not
kind of
even
playing that
early
Moff.
drafts. Like there were scenes, like they shot
Oh,
it.
see,
Like you
right?
could see a lot of the yeah, like you could see a lot of the deleted scenes.
Those deleted scenes rock, by the way.
No, it's very cool. And there's a thing where the Emperor is playing mind games with Vader, and he's pitting Moff Gerad or whatever his name is against Vader. And like he's doing that, and it was there, like they shot it. There's a moment where Gerad or whatever says to Vader, like, you know, the Emperor won't see you or whatever, and then like he starts to force choke him, and it's really some cool stuff. So, but again, very similarly to what happened in Revenge of the Sith, where there's a lot of great stuff, really interesting things that were cut out to make room for, in this movie, the Luke story, in Revenge of the Sith, the Anakin story. Like what ended up happening in both of those movies was it was way too long. A lot of stuff had to go, and they really had to focus on one thing. And in this movie, they really had to zero in on, okay, this is Luke's story. In Revenge of the Sith, you lose all that stuff about Padme and the group of senators in the Senate, and they're starting to form the rebellion, and Bail Organa's there, and all this stuff, and all this really interesting stuff that you completely lose because otherwise it would have been like a 3.5 hour movie. And they were like, okay, we have to make it about Anakin, have to make it about Anakin. I think something similar happens here.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of space battle maybe got cut too. Like it feels like there could have been more. As awesome as the space battle was, it's like you didn't actually get to see the B-wings do anything, type of thing.
Yeah, well,
Sad.
so
Yeah.
so so they had a problem. So they had a problem with the wings of the B wing were too thin, and they had a lot of problems losing the wings in the compositing when they keyed out the blue screen. So they ended up not being able to use a lot of those shots.
I
That
guess that
makes
makes sense,
sense.
but I'm thinking about like the X-wings as well. X-wings have the X-wings, the foils have like they're really thin. So like, I don't
It must have
know.
been the
Like
angles they used to shoot them.
but the B-wings are a cool design.
So what do we think about Luke going to the dark side? When I was a kid, I didn't really see the big deal. Maybe I just wasn't really getting it, but I was like, just don't go to the dark side. Like I don't, and that's kind of like what he, and that's kind of what he does in the movie.
Yeah.
He's just like, nope, I'm not going to do it. And
Yeah.
and I'm like,
And I'm like,
yeah, right.
oh,
Yeah, like I don't really see. But what is really interesting, if you read again, I'm like a commercial for J.W. Rinzer's Making of Return of the Jedi. But when George Lucas explains how you fall to the dark side, it's basically it's like a meter, right? And the more evil things you do, the more your dark side level rises. And then once you get to a certain point, it's like flipping a switch and then you're on the dark side, right? So if you have that in mind, what the Emperor's trying to do makes sense. He's trying to make Luke so mad that he trips the switch and he falls to the dark side.
I think I agree with you as a little kid. I think the thing that makes me as an adult think like maybe the dark side is I can see going to it and like doing it is like they say it's like, oh, the light side's it's hard. It's hard to be good. It's hard to do the light side stuff. And the dark
yeah.
side's just an easy hack. It's a hack. And now as an adult, I'm like, oh God, yeah. I mean, if I could win the battle by doing the easy thing, even I'll do that. Sure, whatever. And I'll deal with the dark side later when it comes, you know?
Well, no, I mean, I agree with you. Like now I get it. Like now it actually works for me a lot better than when I was a kid. Like the Emperor saying, I know you want to kill me. Kill me. I'm right here. But that is what will make him fall to the dark side. Like it would be so easy.
When it's easier when somebody's emotional. So like that's why Anakin was in a position to have that flip switch like really quickly. Make it somebody emotional, then if you want to manipulate them that way, then they're a little bit
Right.
more easy.
It worked for me, and I honestly think that's probably one of the best moments. Again, like going back and thinking as a kid is like even just thinking the three movies is almost one thing, and what stands out to me is definitely like the line of like, "I'm a Jedi like my father before me" is definitely like, "Damn, that was good," type of thing that I really responded to as a kid.
Totally. Yeah. By the way, I was reading the Taschen making of, or they published a book about the making of the original trilogy and then another one about the prequel trilogy. And in the one about the original trilogy, the author, Paul something, I forget his name, he's interviewing George Lucas, and George Lucas is basically talking about how the original movies were so not what he wanted. Like it was so hard to get so little and blah blah blah. He wasn't really happy with so much of it. The author was like, I mean, there's got to be something you were happy with. Like, what's your favorite thing in the original movies? And George Lucas says there's one nice shot in Return of the Jedi in the duel between Vader and Luke, that tracking shot that goes under the stairs.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Mm.
Yep.
I love that
He
part.
was like, that was a pretty good shot.
Something else I want to say about that whole scene and the Emperor in general too is I think going back to this theme of relating this to like this is the first prequel, the prequel to the prequel, a lot of similar things going on is I think John Williams is like on a whole other level with the Emperor's theme. To me, like, yeah, this Emperor's theme is like John Williams is kind of like getting more operatic, which then goes fully operatic kind of like in a sense in episode one with Duel of Fates. I think.
Mm.
I think there's a through line to me between those two themes, which I think, kind of works in that this idea that you're saying that the Return of the Jedi is a prequel to the prequel.
Oh yeah, like there's also like I don't think it's the Emperor's theme specifically, but that moment that we were just talking about with that shot during the duel is the first time John Williams he brings in the vocals, like the chorus.
Yep.
And obviously that is the centerpiece of Duel of the Fates is the choral chanting in that.
Well, riffing on the John Williams, I think, and I could be wrong, but in Jabba's palace, it sounds like he's actually incorporating synthesizers for the first
He
time in
is.
Star Wars
His son.
in Jabba's
His son
palace.
is in Toto.
Yeah, in that mood change, like there's so many things that have been heightened in Return of the Jedi, and that mood change with the synthesizers, like there's an evolution of his score. Like I think like John Williams is the ultimate like greatest evolution in Star Wars. The effects and the music, for me, like sure, there's character arcs and things, but like the score to me, like I have the scores on cassette tape. They're so good, and I probably listen to the Jedi score more than any of the others because I think it takes what he started and builds on each of the pieces, each of the themes, and he interweaves them so well. And that last act of Jedi is just like the most interesting play of all the pieces of the themes that he's actually built in that time.
I agree. I think, thinking about it, I think you're probably right. I think that the Jedi soundtrack is the one I probably listened to the most as a kid, for sure.
I
Oh,
think
it's so
John Williams
so
definitely
good.
MVP, in of the Star Wars. I think they would not have been
Yeah.
as great of movies as they are if it really wasn't for what he was doing musically. I think they could easily have just been another kind of more B sci-fi picture,
Well, I'd say that
You're
for
Yeah.
right.
Home Alone as well. Like,
That could have
like
easily been a B sci-fi Star Wars picture
like
without the
John
music.
Williams' score in Home Alone elevates that film to like a whole other plane. Like, I would say probably like one of the greatest like film score composers of all
You
time.
know, for Home Alone, I feel like it almost makes it more sinister in a good way. Like, it wouldn't have
Yeah,
that, like, weird,
it
like,
really
yeah.
does. It
Mm.
elevates like the quality of that film, like through the root, like into the stratosphere of what the film. I think I saw that like in the Netflix like movies that made us or whatever. But it's true. Like getting John Williams in and yeah, and Jedi I think is just probably the best example of his work, and especially the throne room sequence. Like when Luke is just when Luke's getting all sweaty and that lightsaber battle is just like it is ferocious. It is just like hard strikes, like death blows. And honestly, I still think it's the one of the best lightsaber duels in all of Star Wars, because it is really hacking death blows, like just like pure anger. The strikes are all intended to hit and to kill. Like it really is like violent and in a way that like it
It's
ferociously
ferocious.
Yeah.
violent.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm
and
pretty
that
sure it's my favorite too.
yeah, and it seems to be the most realistic. Like this is a duel to the death right now until ultimately he stops and he's like, I won't fight you. So he realizes, what he's doing. But then he snaps back and it goes violent again.
With that great shot, like, he realizes, like, "Oh, shit, like, I am literally turning into my father."
Yeah. And the hand to hand recognition of like chopping off the hand, looking at his own hand, like it's all there.
Yeah. He's like, "I just did to my father what he did to me. I literally have a machine hand." Like, shit. I mean, yeah, I mean, it might not be subtle, but it's fantastic.
It
It's fucking
works. Yeah,
great.
it's
A nice little like they kind of reminded you in the Jabba scene when he gets shot in the hand. You're like, oh yes, this will be important later.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Now remember
So, the last question that I have, how do we feel about Vader's redemption? Does that final act of sacrificing himself to save his son and taking out the Emperor, is that a real redemption? Does that make him a good guy again? Does that make up for the
I mean, that
untold death and destruction?
only only in the sense that that's the best that you can do at that point. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, so then, like, if that's I don't know. Can you? It's more of a question of like, are you willing to accept it in that context or not?
Yeah,
Um,
well, so it's interesting because the prequels actually make it not work for me.
Yeah, no, totally.
Because when you just know him as Darth Vader, I
yeah,
mean, okay, sure, like it kind of works. Like you don't really think too much about it. It's like, oh shit, like he did the right thing in the end. But then like when you see it as, he did, I mean, he murdered children
right.
in Revenge of the Sith. Like, I don't know, it's this really interesting, problematic thing that he's basically saying, no, like all is forgiven. So like the movie, when you see the ghost of Anakin Skywalker alongside Yoda and Obi-Wan at the end, it's sort of like, oh no, yeah, he did it. He turned good again. I mean, there aren't any consequences.
Even the prequel showed that he was emotionally like he loved Padme, and like so that's like kind of like where his heart is. So like when he does a sacrifice at the end of Return of the Jedi, it's like for to some degree it's for Luke, but like is it just for Luke? Because like does he care about saving the galaxy pretty much, or is it just kind of a personal redemption for him? Because like so that's kind of, I think that would make a difference too. Like what is he doing this for? Is it literally just for Luke? Because that's like kind of like that's like how his emotions work. He just kind of like
Yeah,
he loves the people that he loves and doesn't care about anybody else.
yeah. I mean, that's certainly a way to read it. He's lucky he died.
Yeah. Well, I think we would have the like Nuremberg trials of like Star Wars as the next movie if he.
Like, dude, like I frankly, for me, I would love to see that. Just me personally, like that really pushes all my buttons. And then, something that I think is left unexplored, which I think is a missed opportunity, but they get into it in some of the novels. But Leia, when she becomes a leader in the New Republic, like it's a scandal when people find out her dad was Darth Vader.
Yeah, yeah, I do remember that.
I mean, like, imagine the dramatic potential there, the implications of being related to Vader and the implications of like Vader having to face the consequences for what he's done and really atone. Like he doesn't I mean, I think I'm making my position clear. Like I don't think what he does is really redemption. It's like, oh, thanks, guy. Like at the
Yeah.
very last possible moment, you decided to do the least you could possibly do.
He redeemed himself in the eyes of Luke.
Right.
That
Yeah.
was in that film's context, that's all that mattered. And like that's how I'm
Yeah,
actually viewing the film. I'm actually not really trying to think about the prequels at all. So I haven't seen them
yeah.
enough to have any type of like emotional resonance for me. So um like and I've seen Jedi, probably one of the films I've seen the most in my entire life. So uh yeah, I think yeah, I'm cool with the redemption and I think it's all good at the end because you got that Ewok song and they're drumming on helmets and and like they're gonna
Yeah.
have
Having
barbecue
a
that's
grand
not
old time.
human. Yeah, yeah, and like and also like the attack teams down there. So you got Lando, you got Wedge, and like they're all gonna have some barbecue with the Ewoks, and I think it's gonna be a great time. Like that for me is like the best ending ever. Like you're gonna have barbecue with
You
teddy
know,
bears. It's gonna be great.
I guess my answer to the question is I'm gonna play like my usual like chain card or Blade Runner where it's like maybe it is, maybe it's like you're not supposed to know. Like that's the thing. That's the thing is like you actually don't know if it's redemption or not redemption. I guess you do know that the Force Ghost, but like to me it's almost like a good thing, like or not like another movie would just be like Luke being some sort of religious zealot, being like, no, he is redeemed. He is one with the Force now, and he's at peace. And then like, Han or Leia being like, dude, he murdered millions. Like, no, that's not acceptable. I don't and like they almost
Yeah.
don't like there's like the idea that like there's these two, like there can be these two thoughts on it, both from the fans and from even like within the universe of like, hey, the Force says like the Force is like thousands him. He confessed on his deathbed. Sorry, he's a horrible
the
person,
movie
but
kind
he's
of
going to heaven
leaves
because
it
he
open
did
to
his
that.
deathbed convention, and that's just the way the religion works. And then like the other people being like, well, then maybe this religion's kind of a little fucked up because in a not like Force Jedi perspective, like no, he is not redeemed. That's not enough. Sorry.
It's kind of like the good place system of whether you're a good person or a bad person. It's like the same conception Lucas has about you got your dark side points and your light side points, right? And it's like if you can do one thing that just kind of puts you over the edge on the light side, then you're going to heaven.
RPG rules.
Right, exactly. Something that's kind of interesting, Howard Kassanjian, who just came out with his biography, by the way, in the last year, that was co-authored by J.W. Rinsler, who sadly passed away in the last year. Howard Kassanjian brought up with George Lucas this issue. He was like, I don't get this whole redemption thing. Like Vader's basically space Hitler, and you're basically saying, okay, now all is forgiven. Like, how does that work? And Howard Kassanjian was he took his Christian faith very seriously. And George Lucas said in response, well, your religion is all about forgiveness. And Howard Kassanjian was like, and in that moment, he made me realize, yeah, it is. I, I mean, that is what forgiveness is. And Russ, you're right, because especially when this movie was made, it is only through the eyes of Luke. Obviously, you're not thinking about the prequels because the prequels didn't exist. I just think the problems come in when George Lucas's personal view of what's going on here comes in. I don't think that works. In his mind, this is a redemption for the character that he depicted in the prequel trilogy, and I don't know that I buy that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think the prequels necessarily have a nice, clean, straight slide into the original trilogy. I never did. That's fine. They don't have to. I don't watch them, and so it's okay. I watch Return of the Jedi though. It's the best Star Wars movie and still my favorite.
I'll tell you what I do watch.
I definitely feel like, I reached a point where it's like canon's what I make it, and I think I'm with you where it's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
got
Head
these three
canon.
movies.
It's all head
They're canon, and
canon.
I can pretend I don't, yeah, that the prequels, I don't, it's weird. Like
Yeah.
when even before the
Cheers.
prequels, there was, like there was like expanded universe stuff, and there was the stuff after Return of the Jedi, and then they started doing Old Republic stuff or whatever. And I had just no interest. I never had anything in interest in terms of what happened literally a minute
Well,
before episode 4. Like, I don't know why. It just was nothing that interested me. Like,
see, and the Halloween movie series officially made this okay because there's like 4 different timelines there, and like so you literally have to pick which ones you want to have your headcanon be.
right.
So that like opens the doors. You can do that for anything now.
Totally, yeah.
Do you want to hear the translated lyrics of Lumpy Neck?
Yes,
Yep.
please.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not going to sing them. I'm just going to say them. My body heat is rising. My soul is sympathizing. A loving man is coming. So I'm shaping up and working out. I feel my heart a pumping. My whole brain is thumping. A fancy man is coming. Because, by the way, Lumpy Neck is fancy man. That's what that means. Yes, a fancy man is coming. I'm shaping up and working out. Well, sing, people sing. You got to work your mind. You got to be okay. You got to walk the street. You got to move your bod. You got to work your feet. We're shaping up and working out.
We're shaping up and working out.
I want to see that movie where that's the theme song to the movie. Like, I want to see that in Star Wars universe movie.
I want to see that Phil Collins musical style with those lyrics, and then it's Miami Vice style montage of like a Jedi like
Yeah.
preparing for the final.
They're just leaving money on the table.
They sing that song before Luke showed up, right? Like, I almost wonder, he's like
Yes,
a
I believe
fancy
so.
man. Is this some sort of thing where they're like, oh yeah, it's like a fancy man's coming. He's coming for you. That's Luke. They're singing about Luke.
Well, that's my headcanon. But no, seriously, like, I mean, at the end of the day, I love this movie. I know that there were a lot of things I critiqued about it, but at the end of the day, like, I love this movie. It's one of my favorite movies. I will always love this movie. And I really enjoyed this conversation with all of you. Any final closing thoughts about Return of the Jedi?
I'll agree. I actually like, this is a great movie. I watch it and I'm like, yeah, I love it. I don't care. Like, Ewoks are cool. I don't care. They're cute. To me, it's like Empire's my favorite movie, and there's nothing bad I can say about it. It's just like a well-made movie. This is a movie that like is so close to my heart, and like I can pick apart forever, but it's just never, no matter how hard I pick it apart myself, is it going to actually ever make me not enjoy it though? Because it's just like the pinnacle of like this 80s blockbuster cinema. Like I think the only thing that can top it in that sense is probably Raiders, you know?
Yeah.
We pick because we love.
Yeah, I think I love more than anything just like imperfect movies. Like my favorite genre of movies, horror movies, and that's like filled with like almost by definition like imperfect movies. I like things that are just messy and like imperfectly great. So I think that's a big reason why I like this. Maybe my number one, depending on how I feel on the day.
Very well said.
I just want to point out that the shield generator base door is also a fairly large door. So back on my theme of Jedi contains many large doors, whether it be a docking bay or so just even the Rancor has the gate cage door. So big doors is a theme throughout Return of the Jedi that I really didn't get into talk about in depth, but it's something. Feel free to DM me or something afterwards. I can go in great detail about the many doors of Star Wars, and particularly in Return of the Jedi.
Well, you should DM the Emperor and tell him to put a fucking door on the open chamber to the reactor core that he has in his throne room. What the fuck is wrong with this man?
Well,
He's sitting next to like a
that's policy. No limited railing and no gates or grates.
Got to work fast.
I think we should just do just a podcast and just the doors of Star Wars.
From doors to doors.
I definitely want to do a whole trash compactor about all the doors in Star Wars. I'm serious.
Star Doors.
Star Doors.
It's an adorable idea.
I think there's something there.
I
Like,
debated
maybe
saying that, but I did.
Well, I really want to thank all three of you. This was a really fun conversation. I really enjoyed it. And nothing I like more, I always say, than talking about Star Wars with my friends. It's my favorite thing to do. And this is a great movie to do it with. I want to thank my guests, Russ, Mickey, and Fry. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please rate us 5 stars on whatever podcast platform you choose, and follow us trashcompod.com or trashcompod across all social media. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one.